Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly onto a frozen prairie where the wind has nothing to stop it, and the horizon feels too big for comfort. You're standing above a small rise in the ground, barely noticeable unless you know what to look for. A low door. A faint line where sod meets sky. Somewhere beneath your boots a winter home waits. The air smells clean and sharp, almost metallic, and your breath comes out in pale clouds that vanish before you can follow them. You probably will not survive this winter if you wander out here unprepared. And that is not a joke, just a calm fact offered early so you understand the stakes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where in the world you are listening from. Now dim the lights and let yourself move forward down and into the earth. You crouch and pull open the door. It scrapes stiff with cold and a breath of warmer air leaks out, carrying the smell of soil, smoke and human life held very close together. You step inside and feel the ceiling press low above your head. This is not a cabin. There are no logs stacked neatly, no windows cut with care. This is a dugout. A home carved directly into the prairie itself, shaped by hands that needed shelter fast and had little else to work with. What is broadly accepted by historians is that frontier dugouts were common across the Great Plains during the late 19th century, especially where timber was scarce, and winters arrived early and stayed late. Settlers did not choose dugouts because they were cozy. They chose them because grass and soil were available everywhere, and the earth offered insulation that thin wooden walls could not. You feel that truth immediately. The wind that bullied you outside fades into a distant hiss. The ground itself holds you steady and cold but reliable. You straighten slowly, careful not to bump your head and let your eyes adjust. Light here is muted, borrowed from the doorway, and a small lamp that flickers uncertainly. Shadows cling to corners. The walls are packed earth, reinforced with sod blocks stacked like oversized bricks. If you press your palm against them, they feel damp and firm, smelling faintly of grass roots and clay. It is not pretty, but it is solid. You probably notice the quiet first, not silence exactly, but a muffled version of the world. Snowstorms rage above, but down here they sound like someone brushing a hand across fabric. Wind roars outside, but inside it becomes a low, constant murmur, almost soothing once you stop listening for danger. Many settlers later wrote that dugouts felt safer during storms than surface homes, though historians still argue whether this sense of safety was psychological comfort or genuine structural advantage. You set your boots near the door, and the floor beneath you is packed dirt swept smooth by repeated use. In winter, this ground freezes hard and then slowly thaws just enough to feel damp again. That dampness creeps into everything: clothing, bedding, even food. It is one of the first lessons of dugout living. Dry is a luxury you learn to stop expecting. A small stove sits against one wall, its metal darkened by constant use. It does not look impressive, but is the heart of the space. Without it, the cold would settle into your bones and refuse to leave. With it, you get something like warmth, though never the kind that lets you forget where you are. Even when the fire behaves, which is not often, the heat is uneven. One side of your body warms while the other stays chilled, and you rotate slowly like food over a weak flame. Here is a curious detail that does not make it into many school books. Some dugout roofs were reinforced with old wagon covers, fence rails, or even discarded furniture layered beneath sod to keep ceilings from collapsing under heavy snow. Necessity made architects out of everyone. It also made optimists. Every winter, families trusted that what they had built would hold just a little longer. You listen to the stove tick and pop as it adjusts to the fire. Smoke leaks sometimes, especially when the wind shifts and pushes it back down the pipe. Your eyes sting and you blink until tears blur the room. Eventually you stop noticing the smell. That happens faster than you would expect. Human senses are very good at adapting when they have no other choice. There is a bed along one wall, or something that calls itself a bed. A simple wooden frame, maybe rope strung across it, topped with straw or corn husks stuffed into a ticking. On top of that, quilts layered thick and heavy. The weight of them matters. You sleep better when you feel pressed down, anchored, as if the earth itself is reminding you to stay put. You sit and the straw shifts beneath you with a soft rustle. Outside, the wind rises again and snow begins to tap against the roof. The sound is gentle, almost polite, nothing like the violence you imagine when you picture prairie storms. This is another surprise. Dugouts make winter quieter, if nothing else. Some scholars suggest that this quiet played a role in why families endured dugout life longer than planned. What began as temporary shelter often stretched into years. Comfort is relative. When the alternative is exposure, even a low, dark room carved from soil can start to feel like home. You think about the people who lived like this not as a novelty, but as daily reality. Children learn to walk under low ceilings. Adults learn to bend without thinking. Everyone learned where to step so they would not track snow onto the bedding. These small habits added up night after night, winter after winter. You lie back and stare at the ceiling inches from your face. You can see where sod blocks press together, where roots still cling stubbornly to the soil. Life from above refusing to fully let go. There is something grounding about that. The prairie does not disappear just because you hide beneath it. It stays with you quite literally over your head. As the lamp dims and the stove settles into a low, steady burn, your breathing slows. Outside, winter continues its work reshaping the land in cold and silence. Inside, you are held in a shallow pocket of warmth and effort and hope. This is where the season begins for you, not with a dramatic blizzard, but with the simple act of staying put underground, listening to the earth breathe. You wake without ceremony. There is no sunrise to announce itself, no light spilling dramatically across a floor. Morning arrives here as a subtle thinning of darkness, a sense that the world above has shifted even if you cannot see it. You sit up carefully remembering the low ceiling just in time and feel the chill that settled in while the fire slept. The stove is quiet now, its metal cool to the touch, and the air feels heavier than it did last night, damp with breath and time. This is where the work begins long before anyone steps outside. You pull on yesterday's clothes, still stiff with cold, and your fingers move slowly, reluctant to leave the shelter of blankets. The dugout smells different in the morning. Less smoke, more earth. A faint sourness from boots drying poorly near the door. You notice it then, you do not. That is another small adaptation you make without thinking. You step toward the wall and run your hand along it again. Packed soil, grass roots, the prairie itself turned inward. It is easy to forget how much effort went into creating this space. Digging a dugout was not a casual project. It meant weeks of labour cutting into hard ground with hand tools, hauling dirt away bucket by bucket, shaping walls that would not collapse when the rains came or the frost heaved the soil. What most historians agree on is that dugouts represented a practical marriage between environment and urgency. Settlers used what the land offered because waiting for better materials meant risking exposure. You imagine the first days of digging before winter tightened its grip, the sun overhead, the soil dry and stubborn, blisters forming, muscles burning. There is a reason many early dugouts were shallow at first, expanded later as time and strength allowed. Survival came first. Comfort was something you planned for later when later felt more certain. A quirky detail that turns up in diaries from the period is that some families marked progress by how far down they could stand upright. Reaching full height without hitting your head was celebrated quietly like a milestone no one bothered to announce. It meant space to breathe, space to live. You crouch now, lighting, kindling, and coaxing the stove back to life. The flame catches reluctantly as if offended at being disturbed. Smoke curls upward, finds the pipe, then hesitates. You crack the door just enough to encourage the draft. Cold air rushes in sharp and bracing, and for a moment you feel winter reclaim the room. Then the smoke lifts, the fire steadies, and you close the door again, sealing yourself back inside the earth. As the room warms slowly, you think about how deliberate every movement must be here. You do not pace. You do not waste energy. Space is limited, and so is heat. Even thoughts feel quieter underground, as if they too learn not to expand unnecessarily. There is debate among scholars about whether dugouts should be considered temporary shelters or fully realised homes. Some argue they were stopgaps, symbols of hardship to be escaped as soon as possible. Others point out that many families invested real care into these spaces, reinforcing walls, smoothing floors, even whitewashing interiors with lime to brighten the darkness. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. Dugouts were not dreamed of, but they were lived in earnestly. You notice the way the walls curve, slightly shaped more by human reach than by design. Straight lines are rare here. Everything follows the logic of arms, shoulders, and shovels. Even the ceiling bears the marks of effort. Wooden beams laid across the span, covered with brush or boards, then layered thickly with sod. Each layer a promise that the roof will hold through another storm. Outside, you can hear the wind again testing the surface. Snow shifts. Something scrapes faintly across the top, maybe grass bending, maybe nothing at all. Down here, those sounds lose their menace. The earth absorbs them, softens their edges. This is one of the great advantages of dugout life, though it comes with trade-offs. Light is scarce, dampness is constant, privacy is theoretical at best. You pour water into a pot, careful not to spill. Water is precious in winter, not because it is rare, but because it freezes when you're not paying attention. Containers crack. Buckets turn solid overnight. You learn quickly to keep water close to the stove, to rotate supplies, to never assume tomorrow's water will still be liquid. As the pot warms, you watch steam rise, a small miracle every morning. Warmth means life. It means the day can begin. You eat simply, bread if you have it, maybe something salted or preserved. Meals are not events. They are maintenance. There is a common misconception that frontier families spent their winters idle, trapped by snow. In reality, winter was full of work, just quieter work, repairing tools, mending clothes, planning, writing letters when ink would still flow. Dugouts became workshops of patience. You sit again, feeling the heat slowly seep into your legs. The floor remains cold. It always will. Some families spread rugs or extra straw to insulate it, but earth remembers winter longer than air does. You shift your feet and tuck them closer instinctively, minimizing contact with the ground. As this day settles into its rhythm, you understand something important. This space is not just shelter, it is a compromise between what you want and what you can manage, between the vastness above and the intimacy below. Living in a dugout teaches you to accept that compromise without resentment, because resentment burns energy you cannot spare. You glance once more at the walls, at the packed earth holding steady. This place was dug by intention and endurance. Every inch downward was a choice to stay. And as the fire crackles softly and the wind passes overhead, you feel that choice carrying you forward one careful day at a time. Night returns quietly as if it never really left. In a dugout, darkness is not an event. It simply deepens. You notice it when the edges of the room soften and the lamp flame becomes the brightest thing you own. You close the door early, not because it is late by a clock, but because the cold has begun to lean harder against the entrance, testing for weakness. The latch settles. The world shrinks to this low earthen room again. You add one last piece of fuel to the stove, listening to the small negotiation between metal and fire. Too much and it smokes. Too little and it dies before morning. You learn the balance by feel, not by rule. That kind of learning becomes common out here. It settles into your hands faster than it ever reaches your thoughts. You lie down carefully, arranging blankets with the same care you might use to pack supplies for a journey. Each layer matters. Straw mattress first, scratchy but forgiving. Then a thin blanket to keep the straw from poking through. Then heavier quilts sewn from whatever fabric could be spared. Wool if you are lucky, cotton if you are not. What is widely recognized by historians is that layered bedding was one of the most important defenses against winter cold on the frontier, sometimes more effective than the stove itself. You pull the covers up to your chin and feel their weight press you into stillness. That pressure is comforting. It reminds you that you are anchored, that the earth has accepted you for the night. Your breath slows, the lamp flickers, then dims as you turn it down, saving fuel. Shadows thicken. The ceiling feels closer now, as if the dugout leans in slightly once you lie flat. Sleep does not arrive immediately, it rarely does here. Instead, you listen. There is the stove ticking softly as it cools. There is the wind, a low, steady presence you feel more than hear. There are the small sounds of the structure itself. Wood beams, adjusting sod, shifting as temperatures change. None of these noises signal danger, but all of them demand attention at first. Your mind, used to wider spaces, tries to map the room again and again. A curious thing happens after a while. The sounds blend. What once felt crowded begins to feel contained. This is one reason some settlers later described dugouts as oddly peaceful places to sleep. Modern historians still debate whether this calm came from actual safety or from exhaustion reshaping perception. Either way, people slept. You adjust your position, careful not to brush the wall. Moisture beads there sometimes, and you do not want dampness creeping into your blankets. Condensation is a quiet companion in winter dugouts. Warm breath meets cold earth and leaves behind frost patterns that sparkle briefly in lamplight before melting into slick trails. Some mornings you wake to find delicate ice feathers traced along the walls as if winter signed its name while you slept. Your breathing fogs faintly in front of your face. That always surprises newcomers. Even indoors, even under layers, the cold makes itself known. You tuck your hands deeper under the covers, curling slightly to conserve heat. This posture becomes familiar, almost automatic, a shape your body remembers night after night. You think briefly of houses with tall ceilings and wide windows of rooms where air moves freely and light pours in without effort. Then the thought drifts away. Comparison does not help you sleep. Out here, you learn to accept what is not what might have been. There is a small shelf near the bed holding a few personal items. A book perhaps, though reading by lamplight strains your eyes. A tin cup. Maybe a letter folded and unfolded so many times it feels soft as cloth. These objects take on greater importance in winter. They are proof of continuity, proof that life exists beyond the walls even if you cannot reach it right now. One odd detail recorded in several personal accounts is that people sometimes slept with their boots inside the bed tucked near their feet to keep them from freezing solid overnight. It is not comfortable, but neither is pulling on boots stiff as boards in the morning. You make small compromises like this all the time, choosing inconvenience now to avoid misery later. The fire settles into a low glow. You listen for it, gauging its strength by sound alone. Too quiet would worry you. Too lively would mean wasted fuel. This middle state is just right. You let yourself trust it. Outside, the storm strengthens. Snow begins to slide off the roof in soft rushes. Occasionally something heavier thumps down, maybe a clump of ice or frozen sod. Each time you pause, listening for follow-up sounds that would suggest trouble. None come. The roof holds. It almost always does. Your thoughts slow. They move in wider loops now, touching on the day and drifting away again. Tomorrow's tasks hover briefly. Water to thaw, fire to feed, maybe a path to clear if the snow pile's too high. These are manageable concerns. Winter teaches you to break time into small, survivable pieces. As sleep finally approaches, you notice how the dugout shapes your dreams. They tend to be quieter here. Less sprawling, images repeat. Earth, fire, hands working close together. Some psychologists suggest that enclosed sleeping spaces encourage deeper rest by limiting sensory input. Frontier settlers did not have that language, but many noticed they slept heavily underground even when conditions were harsh. Your last waking thought is not fear, but gratitude. Not the dramatic kind, just a steady awareness that you are sheltered, that the wind has been kept at bay for another night. The prairie presses down gently and you press back with breath and warmth and patience. When sleep takes you, it does so fully. The lamp glows low. The stove hums faintly. Above you, winter continues its long work, reshaping the land grain by grain. Below it you rest wrapped in earth and effort, learning how to endure one quiet night at a time. You begin to notice light not as brightness, but as permission. Permission to move, to see just enough to function, to remind yourself that the world still exists above your head. In a dugout, light never arrives all at once. It seeps, it leaks, it burrows its way inside through the doorframe, through cracks you did not realize were there, through the thin fabric of routine. You open the door briefly, just enough to let daylight spill across the floor in a pale rectangle. Snow reflects it back weakly, and for a moment the dugout looks larger than it really is. Shadows retreat to the corners, reluctant but obedient. You close the door again quickly. Light is welcome, but cold is not. There are no windows here, at least not in the way you would recognize them. Cutting an opening into an earth wall risks collapse, and glass is rare, expensive, and fragile. Instead, you learn to live by indirect illumination. A lantern hung carefully, a lamp placed where it will not be knocked over. Sometimes a simple tin reflector angled just right to push light farther into the room. These small tricks become second nature. Accounts from the period consistently show that many dugouts relied almost entirely on artificial light even during the day. Kerosene lamps, tallow candles, or oil burners provided a steady glow that blurred the difference between morning and evening. Over time, you stop tracking hours by the sun and start tracking them by tasks. When the fire needs feeding, when water must be warmed, when hunger nudges you again. Your eyes adapt. That's something people underestimate. At first, the dimness feels oppressive, even disorienting. But after a few weeks, you find yourself navigating the room without hesitation. You know where the stove edge sits. You know how many steps it takes to reach the bed. Darkness becomes familiar, almost friendly. There is a peculiar side effect to this kind of lighting. Colours fade. Everything shifts toward brown, grey, and amber. Fabrics lose their distinction. Faces soften. In low light, harsh details disappear. Wrinkles blur. Expressions calm. Some observers later suggested that the visual softness contributed to the emotional tone of winter dugout life. Without sharp light, tempers dulled slightly too. One unusual habit shows up in a few personal letters from the plains. Some families painted their interior walls with lime or chalk mixtures whenever possible, not for cleanliness alone, but to reflect what little light they had. The result was never bright, but it helped. A pale wall gives light somewhere to go. You imagine the satisfaction of seeing the room glow just a bit more evenly after that effort. Still light remains something you manage carefully. Fuel must last. Lamps are turned low. Flames are shielded from drafts. You learn to perform many tasks by touch alone. Sewing becomes a daytime activity whenever possible. Reading is saved for moments when the lamp can be spared, and your eyes are not already aching from smoke. There is no wasted illumination here. Every flicker is deliberate. Some researchers point out that limited winter light likely affected sleep patterns on the frontier. Without strong daylight cues, people often slept in segments. A few hours of rest, a period of wakefulness, then sleep again. In a dugout, this rhythm feels natural rather than disruptive. You wake, tend the fire, maybe sit quietly listening to the wind, then lie down again when fatigue returns. You experience this yourself. One night you wake with no sense of time at all. The room is dim, the fire low, your body warm enough, but restless. You sit up careful and quiet and let your eyes adjust. The lamp casts a small circle of gold on the wall. Beyond it, the dugout dissolves into shadow. This is when imagination stretches its legs. In the absence of visual detail, your mind fills space easily. You hear sounds more clearly. The faint crack of ice outside, the whisper of snow sliding from the roof, the subtle creak of beams responding to cold. Each noise feels closer than it really is. You remind yourself that the earth is thick above you, that the walls are solid, that you are not exposed. Interpretations still differ on whether living with such limited light increased anxiety or reduced it. Some argue the constant dimness heightened imagination and worry. Others suggest it encouraged introspection and calm by limiting stimulation. Your own experience seems to land somewhere between. There are moments when shadows feel heavy. There are others when they feel protective. Morning brings its own version of light, not sunrise but readiness. You open the door again briefly, letting fresh air and pale brightness rush in together. Snow glare forces you to squint. The contrast is startling. Outside feels enormous. Inside feels small but controlled. You close the door and let the dugout reclaim its familiar gloom. As days pass, light becomes less about seeing and more about rhythm. You know when to rise because your body has rested enough. You know when to eat because hunger arrives on schedule. You know when to sleep because fatigue settles behind your eyes. The sun can do what it wants above ground. Down here, you follow a quieter clock. You notice how this affects your thoughts. They slow, they wander less. Without bright light to sharpen edges, worries blur too. You still think about spring, about warmth, about leaving this space someday. But those thoughts float rather than press. Even conversations change. Voices drop naturally, laughter softens. Arguments rarely flare fully because the room itself seems to discourage sharpness. Low ceilings and dim light make excess emotion feel out of place. This does not mean life becomes easy, it means it becomes contained. As you sit near the stove lamp turned low, watching shadows breathe along the walls, you realize something simple. Light here is not meant to conquer darkness, it is meant to coexist with it. Enough to function, enough to endure, not enough to waste. Above you, the prairie reflects the sun in blinding white. Below it, you exist in amber and shadow, wrapped in a version of winter that asks less of your eyes and more of your patience. You settle back, letting the light remain just as it is. No brighter, no dimmer, balanced like everything else in this underground life. Cold is not something that visits you here. It lives with you. It settles in quietly and then refuses to leave no matter how carefully you manage the fire. You feel it first in the mornings when the warmth of sleep slips away and the air presses cool against your face. The dugout has held the worst of the wind at bay, but winter has found another way inside. It seeps from the walls, rises from the floor, and waits patiently for moments when you are still. You sit up and breathe slowly, letting your body catch up. The stove has gone quiet again, its metal dull and unresponsive. You knew this would happen. Fires rarely last the whole night unless you feed them constantly and fuel is too precious to waste that way. Instead, you accept the chill and plan your movements around it. This is one of the realities of dugout living that most personal accounts agree on. Underground shelter moderates temperature, but it does not banish cold. Earth keeps extremes from swinging too wildly, yet in winter it also stores cold like a memory it cannot forget. Even after days of steady fire, the walls remain cool to the touch. The floor stays unforgiving. Warmth floats upward and disappears into the ceiling long before it reaches your feet. You swing your legs off the bed and wince as your soles meet frozen dirt. That shock never fully dulls, though you learn to anticipate it. Some families laid down boards or thick layers of straw to insulate the floor, but even those only helped a little. The ground always wins eventually. You pull on layers. Shirt, another shirt, wool if you have it. A jacket worn thin at the elbows. Clothing becomes part of the structure here, as important as sod and beams. You wear what you have inside because taking layers off is a luxury reserved for warmer places and warmer lives. As you move toward the stove, you notice how your breath fogs the air again. Even indoors, even wrapped in earth, winter leaves its signature. You strike a match, cupping it with care, and coax the fire back to life. The stove responds slowly, grudgingly. Metal expands, wood catches, smoke hesitates, then climbs. There is a strange satisfaction in this ritual. Fire is never guaranteed. Each successful lighting feels like a small victory. Period diaries often mention how emotional attachment formed around stoves, not just as tools, but as companions that decided whether a day would be bearable or brutal. As the room warms, inch by inch you position yourself strategically, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to avoid burns. You rotate occasionally warming one side then the other. This slow turning becomes habitual, almost meditative. One odd practice shows up in a handful of winter recollections. People sometimes hung damp clothing near the stove, not just to dry it, but to add moisture to the air, believing it made the cold feel less sharp. Whether this helped or not remains unclear, but the belief itself reveals how attentive people were to their environment. When comfort is scarce, you experiment with anything that might offer relief. Despite the fire, certain parts of you never quite warm. Fingers stay stiff, toes ache faintly. Your nose remains cold no matter where you sit. Sleep will bring warmth again later, but during the day, cold is a constant companion, not an emergency, just a condition. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about whether prolonged exposure to cold-shaped frontiers behavior in measurable ways. Some suggest it encouraged efficiency and restraint. Others propose it heightened irritability and fatigue. You feel both possibilities inside yourself. You move carefully, you speak less, but you also find your patience thinning when tasks take longer than expected. The dugout amplifies this. There is no pacing to shake off stiffness, no separate rooms to retreat into. Everything happens within a few careful steps. When you feel cold, you cannot escape it by walking away. You manage it instead through posture layering and timing. You plan your day around warmth. Heavy tasks first when movement generates heat. Sitting saved for later once the fire has been burning long enough to soften the chill. Meals timed so that hot food doubles as internal warmth. Even conversations cluster near the stove, voices lowered, bodies drawn closer together. At night, cold behaves differently. Wrapped in quilts, pressed down by weight, you grow warmer than you ever are during the day. This reversal surprises many newcomers. Sleep becomes a refuge, not just from fatigue, but from temperature itself. You look forward to it, not only for rest, but for relief. Still, there are nights when cold sneaks in, a fire dies too early, draft slips through an unseen crack. You wake with your shoulders tense, your breath shallow, and you pull blankets tighter without fully opening your eyes. Over time, you learn to do this without waking completely. Your body adjusts before your mind does. Some families placed heated stones wrapped in cloth near the bed, warming them at the stove before sleep. Others shared space with their animals when possible, believing body heat mattered more than comfort or cleanliness. These practices were not universal, but they appear often enough to suggest ingenuity born from necessity. You sit again watching the stove finally do its work. The room does not grow warm so much as less cold. That distinction matters. Warmth is temporary. Cold is persistent. Accepting that difference changes how you measure success. You stop waiting for comfort and start appreciating function. The fire burns, the roof holds, your fingers move again. That is enough. Outside, the prairie remains locked in ice and wind. Inside, you exist in a narrow band of survivable temperature carved out by effort and attention. Cold presses from all sides, but it does not crush you. It teaches you instead slowly and thoroughly how to endure without complaint. As the day stretches on, you stop noticing the chill quite so sharply. Your body settles into its winter state. Muscles stay slightly tense. Movements stay economical. Thoughts narrow to what matters. And in that narrowing, something unexpected happens. The cold becomes background. Not gone, not conquered, but familiar. Another element of this underground life, steady and unyielding, shaping you quietly as you live within it. The stove is never just a stove. It is a personality. Some mornings it greets you easily, flame-catching with barely a coax. Other days it sulks, drawing smoke back into the room as if offended by your timing. You learn not to take this personally, though. It feels personal when your eyes sting and your throat tightens. Fire here has moods, and you adjust to them the way you adjust to weather. You crouch and open the iron door, listening to the hinge complain softly. Ash dust shifts. You poke gently, careful not to scatter embers onto the dirt floor. Sparks are precious, but uncontrolled sparks are trouble. The balance is delicate. The dugout gives you shelter, but it also gives fire nowhere to escape. Everything happens close. Every mistake feels immediate. Surviving records indicate that small cast iron stoves became common in frontier dugouts once rail access improved, but many early families relied on crude heaters or makeshift fireplaces built from stone and clay. Either way, managing smoke was a constant challenge. Chimneys were short, drafts were unpredictable, wind could reverse airflow without warning. You watch the smoke, closely reading it like a language you have learned out of necessity. You add fuel a piece at a time. Too much wood too fast and the stove overheats, pulling smoke into the room. Too little and the fire starves, leaving you cold and frustrated. The right pace comes with practice. Your hands learn it before your mind does. You begin to sense when the stove needs attention the way you sense thirst or fatigue. As heat builds, the dugout changes character. Metal ticks and pops. The air grows drier near the stove while dampness lingers at the edges of the room. You shift your chair closer, then pull it back again, testing comfort. You rotate your body slowly, warming one side, then the other. This becomes a rhythm you barely notice anymore. There is an odd intimacy to this process. You spend hours each day within arm's reach of the stove. You cook on it, you dry gloves on it. You lean toward it when your fingers go numb. In winter dugouts, the stove often became the social centre, the place where conversation gathered simply because warmth did. One peculiar detail shows up in several recollections from the plains. Some families named their stoves, not jokingly but earnestly, as if acknowledging its importance might make it behave better. Whether or not that helped is questionable, but it says something about the relationship people formed with their heat source. When survival depends on an object, you give it attention. Despite your care, the stove does not always cooperate. Smoke sneaks back into the room, curling low along the ceiling before dropping. Your eyes burn. You cough, a short controlled sound, careful not to waste energy. You crack the door again, just enough to encourage airflow, and a knife of cold slices through the room. You endure it. Better cold for a minute than smoke for an hour. There is no universal agreement among historians about how dangerous dugout stoves truly were. Some argue that smoke inhalation and poor ventilation pose serious long-term health risks. Others suggest that people adapted quickly, keeping fires small and vents open just enough to manage airflow. The truth likely varies from home to home. You only know what happens here in this room, under this roof. Cooking is slow and deliberate. Pots heat unevenly, water takes patience. You stir, you wait, you listen. Meals are simple because complexity costs fuel. Bread warms, stew simmers. Everything tastes faintly of smoke no matter what you do. Eventually you stop trying to eliminate that flavour. It becomes part of the experience like cold air or packed earth. You are careful with embers at night. Before sleeping, you adjust the fire, banking it gently so it will last without flaring. This is one of the most important decisions of the day. A fire that dies too soon leaves you shivering before dawn. A fire that burns too hot risks smoke buildup or worse. You check it twice, sometimes 3 times. Only then do you lie down. Some families placed metal guards around stoves to protect children or keep skirts from brushing too close. Others relied on constant vigilance. Accidents did happen, but they were surprisingly rare given the conditions. Familiarity breeds caution as much as carelessness. You respect the stove because it demands respect. As hours pass, the fire settles into a steady, quiet burn. The dugout feels almost comfortable now, though that word still feels ambitious. You take advantage of the warmth, stretching fingers, loosening shoulders. This is when you mend clothing, hands steady in the heat. Needles move more easily when your fingers can feel them. Experts continue to weigh how much daily labour went into simply maintaining livable conditions in frontier homes. By some estimates, a significant portion of each day was spent managing heat alone. You believe it. Fire requires attention the way a living thing does. Ignore it too long and it punishes you. The stove also shapes time. You wake when it cools. You eat when it is hottest. You sleep when it is stable. Your day bends around its cycle. Clocks mean little here. The stove tells you what hour it is through sensation rather than sound. Later, when the fire fades again and the room cools, you notice how quiet everything becomes. Without the crackle and tick of metal, the dugout feels emptier, larger somehow. You sit still, listening, waiting for the moment when tending it again becomes necessary. There is comfort in this repetition. Fire. Warmth. Cooling. Fire again. Give structure to days that might otherwise blur together under snow and shadow. Even on the hardest winter stretches, the stove offers a sense of progress. Something changes because you act. As you feed it once more and feel heat bloom against your palms, you understand something that settlers understood deeply. Comfort is not a condition you reach and stay in. It is something you build again and again, carefully with attention and restraint. The stove hums softly. Smoke behaves. Warmth spreads just enough to matter. Outside, winter continues its quiet siege. Inside, you keep your small flame alive, and for now, that is enough to hold the cold at a respectful distance. You wake to the quiet realization that the room is breathing with you. Each exhale leaves a faint cloud in the air, and each inhale feels cool but not sharp. The stove has done its best through the night, leaving behind a low, patient warmth that clings mostly to the ceiling. Down near the floor where your feet wait, the cold still rules. This is how mornings begin here, with a gentle reminder of gravity and temperature working together. You sit up slowly and notice the walls first. They're darker now, faintly slick in places where warmth met cold during the night. Tiny beads of moisture have gathered and begun their slow journey downward. In certain spots, thin lines of frost trace delicate patterns already fading as the room warms again. You watch one disappear and feel oddly connected to it, another small thing adjusting to conditions it cannot change. Breath is always visible in winter dugouts, no matter how carefully you manage the fire. People who lived this way often commented on it, not with fear but with resignation. Warm air had nowhere to go, and cold earth waited patiently to receive it. Over time, settlers learned that condensation was unavoidable. The trick was learning where it would gather, and how to keep it from soaking bedding or supplies. You reach for your boots, remembering to check them before slipping your feet inside. If you forget, you will regret it. Leather stiffens overnight, and sometimes a thin skin of ice forms where yesterday's snow melted and refroze. A quick shake sends loose frost scattering across the floor. You knock them together once, twice, then pull them on, grimacing, as your toes meet cold leather. One small but telling habit shows up again and again in winter accounts. People learn to breathe through their noses while sleeping, tucking mouths into blankets simply to reduce how much moisture entered the air. It sounds trivial, but habits like they mattered. Too much dampness meant mold rot and sickness. Survival here often depended on details so small, they barely registered as choices. You move toward the stove and add fuel carefully. As heat builds, the air changes texture. It grows heavier, softer. Moisture begins to lift again, pulled upward by warmth. This cycle repeats endlessly. Cold draws moisture out, heat releases it. The dugout becomes a slow weather system all its own. There was a quiet understanding among frontier families that dampness was more dangerous than cold alone. Wet clothing chilled faster. Wet bedding stole heat overnight. Period advice passed between neighbours often focused on staying dry rather than staying warm. You do what you can. You hang garments near the stove, you rotate blankets, you wipe walls when they drip too much, you adapt. As the room warms, you notice the smell again. Earthy, smoky, faintly human. It is stronger on mornings like this when everything has been closed tight for hours. You breathe it in without comment. Smell becomes background here, another sense that learns to stop demanding attention. Some later observers wondered whether living with constant dampness affected health in lasting ways. Coughs lingered, joints ached. Yet people endured winters like this for years, sometimes decades. Whether the dugout environment hardened bodies or quietly wore them down was never fully settled. You only know that today you are upright, breathing, moving. That is enough evidence to keep going. You wipe condensation from a small surface near the bed using a scrap of cloth already stiff with repeated use. The motion is automatic. You've learned where water tends to gather. Corners, low spots, anywhere warmth meets resistance. The dugout teaches you to read its moods the way you read the stove. As daylight strengthens, outside faint brightness creeps along the floor again. It does not reach far, but it helps. You work more easily when you can see your hands clearly. Fingers relax, shoulders drop, you begin a task you've been saving. Maybe mending a seam, maybe sorting supplies. These quiet jobs suit the space. The sound of your breath blends with the soft crackle of the fire. Occasionally a drop of moisture falls from the ceiling, tapping the dirt floor. You pause each time listening, making sure it is nothing more. It always is. Still, vigilance becomes instinctive. People often imagine frontier life as loud with hardship, but much of it is quiet management. Managing air, managing heat, managing water. This room demands attention but not drama. You respond in kind. There is a subtle shift that happens as the day progresses. The walls dry slightly, frost vanishes, the air clears. For a few hours, the dugout feels almost balanced. This is when you feel most capable. Tasks go smoothly, thoughts flow, even the cold feels less personal. Later, as evening approaches and the fire burns lower again, the cycle will repeat. Moisture will return, cold will creep back up from the floor. You will adjust without thinking. This rhythm becomes your calendar. Morning condensation, midday balance, evening chill. Some people later claim that living so close to these cycles made them more attentive to weather long after they left the plains. They noticed humidity shifts, temperature changes, air pressure dips. Whether that sensitivity came from necessity or simply memory is hard to say. But you feel it forming now, a quiet awareness settling into your body. As you sit near the stove watching steam lift gently from a pot, you realize how much of your day revolves around invisible things. Air, moisture, heat. You cannot see them directly, but you feel their effects constantly. The dugout sharpens this awareness. It asks you to live inside processes rather than objects. Outside, the prairie glitters briefly under pale sun. Snow reflects light upward, bright and distant. Inside, the dugout holds its softer, darker version of winter. Both exist at once, layered like everything else in this life. You finish your task and rest your hands in your lap, warming them near the stove. Breath rises, moisture lifts, the cycle continues. You do not fight it, you work with it, and in doing so you realize something quietly important. Living here is not about conquering the environment. It is about listening closely enough to stay one step ahead of it. The dugout teaches this lesson slowly through breath on cold air and frost on earthen walls until adaptation feels as natural as breathing itself. When you lie down at night, you become aware of the bed in a way that feels almost intimate. Not just that it exists, but how it has been assembled piece by piece to keep you alive. There is no single surface here that could be called comfortable on its own. Comfort is something created through layering, through patience, through learning exactly where pressure helps and where it hurts. You lower yourself carefully, listening to the faint rustle beneath you. Straw shifts, corn husks compress. Whatever stuffing could be gathered and spared has been packed into a rough shape that calls itself a mattress. It smells faintly of harvest and dust, a reminder that even winter sleep begins months earlier in summer fields. You adjust your weight, finding the spot where the frame does not press too sharply against your back. Beds in frontier dugouts were rarely permanent objects. They changed with seasons, supplies and bodies. What people slept on and in their first winter often bore little resemblances to what they used a year later. Over time, families learned which materials held warmth, which collapsed too quickly, which attracted pests and which had simply lasted. Trial and error shaped rest as much as work. You pull the first blanket over yourself, thin and worn, more symbolic than effective. It protects the mattress from moisture as much as it protects you from cold. Above that comes something heavier, a quilt stitched from mismatched fabric. Old shirts, flour sacks, pieces of dresses no longer wearable. Every square carries a previous life pressed together, now into a single purpose. One quiet habit appears again and again in winter recollections. People tucked blankets tightly around their shoulders and sides, sealing themselves in as if packing goods for transport. Loose edges meant drafts. Drafts meant waking cold. You learn to do this without thinking, hands moving automatically even when you're half asleep. You slide your feet deeper, searching for warmth. Often this is where heat lingers longest, trapped by layers and by the simple fact that you are curled inward. The body adapts to this posture quickly. Knees bend, shoulders round. You become smaller not out of fear but efficiency. It's generally understood that shared bedding was common during harsh winters, especially among children or between adults when fuel was scarce. Body heat mattered. Space were limited. Privacy bent under necessity. You feel the logic of it even when alone. Warmth is not something you hoard. It is something you preserve. There is a strange sense of architecture to all of this. The bed becomes a structure within a structure. Earth walls out some way. Wooden frame inside. Fabric layers forming a final shell around your body. Each layer compensates for the weakness of the one beneath it. Together they do just enough. As you settle, you listen to the sounds of the dugout adjusting. A beam creaks faintly. Straw sighs under your weight. The stove clicks once as metal contracts. These noises would have unsettled you once. Now they signal normalcy. Everything is behaving as expected. Some families added unexpected items to their beds in winter. Newspaper sheets, animal skins, even flattened sacks stuffed with grass. The goal was never luxury, it was insulation. You imagine the quiet satisfaction of discovering that an extra layer makes the difference between sleeping through the night and waking shivering before dawn. There is uncertainty among those who later studied frontier health about how well people truly rested in conditions like this. Some suggest sleep was fragmented, shallow, constantly interrupted by cold or noise. Others argue that physical exhaustion and heavy bedding produced deep, dreamless rest. Your own experience suggests both can be true sometimes in the same night. You turn slightly, finding a better angle. One hip presses less. One shoulder relaxes. Sleep inches closer. It does not rush. It rarely does here. Instead, it arrives like warmth, slowly spreading once conditions are right. You notice how the weight of blankets affects your breathing. Each inhale must work gently against pressure. This steadiness calms you. The world feels held together. You're not floating in space, you're anchored. Some people placed hot stones wrapped in cloth near their feet before sleeping. Others warmed bricks or metal tools by the stove. These improvised heaters offered a few precious hours of comfort. Whether they worked well or simply offered reassurance varied, but reassurance mattered. When nights stretched long, even the promise of warmth helped. You consider how different this feels from sleeping above ground. In a house, cold creeps in from windows. In a dugout, it rises from below. Beds had to account for that. Extra padding beneath mattered as much as blankets above. You press your hand down and feel the compacted layers holding firm. Outside wind moves across the prairie. You hear it only as a suggestion, a soft brushing sound filtered through soil and sod. The bed absorbs your attention instead. Every shift of weight is felt. Every movement matters. You learn to be still not because you are afraid to move, but because stillness keeps warmth where it belongs. There is a quiet dignity in this kind of rest. It is not indulgent. It is earned. You have worked, adjusted, adapted. Now you lie within the result of that effort. As sleep begins to take hold, thoughts slow. You stop planning tomorrow. You stop measuring the cold. You exist only in the present moment, wrapped in layers built by necessity and care. Later, when you wake briefly, perhaps to tend the fire or pull a blanket tighter, you do so without fully surfacing. Muscle memory takes over. Hands move. Breath steadies. You sink back down. Some people later described dugout sleep as the heaviest they ever experienced. Others remembered it as restless. Memory reshapes experience over time. What matters now is that tonight the bed does its job. It keeps you alive, quiet, warm enough. You let yourself drift deeper, the weight of blankets pressing you gently into the earth. Outside winter continues its long watch. Inside you rest within a nest of invention and endurance, learning what it means to be sheltered not by comfort but by effort. The wind announces itself long before you hear it. You feel it in the way the dugout tightens as if the earth above you braces slightly. Air pressure shifts, the stove flame leans. Somewhere overhead grass bends and snow begins to move. You pause, listening not with alarm but with attention. This is familiar now. Weather speaks first through sensation. When the sound finally reaches you, it arrives softened and stretched. Not a howl, but a long, low brushing noise that travels across the ceiling and fades. The prairie is wide and exposed, and the wind has room to gather speed before it reaches your small pocket underground. By the time it gets here, it feels less like an attack and more like a presence passing through. People who lived in dugouts often noted how storms sounded different underground. Instead of sharp crashes and whistles, there was a steady roar like distant water or fabric pulled tight. This muffling effect made some families feel safer during blizzards than they ever did in above-ground homes. Others found it unsettling, unsure whether danger was approaching or already overhead. You find yourself somewhere in between. The roof holds, it usually does. Thick sod absorbs vibration. Packed earth dampens sound. Wooden beams flex slightly then settle. You learn to recognize the difference between normal movement and trouble. A soft slide of snow is nothing. A deep, sudden thud earns your attention. Tonight everything behaves. You sit near the stove and let the wind do its work above you. It scours the land, piling snow into drifts that will take days to clear. You imagine the surface changing shape inch by inch while you remain still. This contrast becomes one of the defining features of winter dugout life. Above ground, constant motion. Below, enforced patience. One small but memorable detail appears in several winter accounts. People sometimes place their hands flat against the ceiling during strong storms, feeling vibrations travel through soil and beam. It was not practical, it did not reinforce the structure, it simply made the storm feel acknowledged. You try it now, palm pressed upward, and feel a faint tremor pass through. The earth responds solid and calm. The wind shifts direction. Sound changes with it. A new rhythm settles in lower and steadier. Snow begins to pack against the door, sealing small gaps you did not know existed. Inside the dugout grows quieter still. This is one of the paradoxes of winter. The worse the storm outside, the calmer it often feels inside. There was never full agreement among those who later reflected on this life about whether dugouts offered true protection or just the illusion of it. Some roofs collapsed under heavy snow, some walls slumped during thaws, yet many families rode out years of storms underground without incident. Safety here was not absolute. It was negotiated season by season. You think about the choice to stay put. Leaving during a storm is rarely an option. Visibility vanishes. Landmarks disappear. Wind erases tracks as quickly as you make them. Dugouts were built not just to endure winter but to wait it out. Waiting becomes a skill. The stove continues its steady burn. Fire and wind coexist, each doing its part. You keep fuel ready, knowing drafts can increase airflow, suddenly causing flames to burn faster than expected. You check the pipe once more. Everything looks as it should. As the storm deepens, you notice how sound reshapes your sense of space. Without clear cues from outside, the dugout feels suspended. Time stretches. Minutes blur. You stop thinking in terms of hours and start thinking in terms of conditions, as long as the roof holds, as long as the fire behaves, as long as you have water and light. This is how winter teaches restraint. You stop projecting too far ahead. You focus on what you can monitor. The rest waits. Later you hear the snow slide again, heavier this time. Your muscles tense briefly, then relax when nothing follows. Experience has taught you that most noises mean nothing. Panic wastes energy. Attention conserves it. You settle back and listen as the storm settles into its longest phase. Wind no longer gusts. It commits. A constant pressure. A steady sound. The dugout absorbs it layer by layer. Earth does what it has always done. It resists change slowly and thoroughly. Some people later said that storms like this changed how they remembered sound forever. They grew attuned to subtle shifts. They noticed when quiet was too quiet. Whether that awareness came from fear or familiarity is hard to separate. But it stayed with them. As night deepens, the storm becomes background. You stop listening for individual noises and start hearing the whole. A single continuous presence. It lulls rather than alarms. The dugout feels like the center of something vast and moving. You lie down again, pulling blankets close and let the sound pass over you. The wind cannot reach you directly. It can only announce itself from above, sliding and pressing and eventually moving on. Outside, the prairie is reshaped without ceremony. Inside, you remain unchanged, held steady by earth and attention. The storm will leave its marks in the morning. Drifts to dig. Paths to find again. For now it simply passes overhead and you rest beneath it, learning how to listen without fear. Food becomes quieter in winter, not in flavour exactly, but in expectation. You stop hoping for variety and start hoping for enough. The dugout smells faintly of stored things. Roots kept cool by the earth jars sealed months ago with careful hands. When you open one, the sound of the lid breaking its seal feels louder than it should a small celebration you do not announce. You move slowly near the stove, mindful of space and heat. Cooking here is never casual. Every action has consequence. A pot left too close scorches. One placed too far stays stubbornly cold. You learn where the sweet spots are, places you could find blindfolded now. The stovetop has zones and you know them by heart. Winter meals lean heavily on what survives time and cold, dried beans, salted meat. Flour stretched into bread when fuel allows. Root vegetables pulled from storage, their skins wrinkled, but interiors still willing. This kind of eating is not about pleasure. It is about reliability. People who lived through these winters learned quickly that predictable food mattered more than exciting food. You stir slowly, watching steam rise. The smell fills the room heavier than it would in open air. Dugouts trap scent the same way they trap warmth. Meals linger long after they are finished, clinging to walls and fabric. Over time you stop separating food smells from the idea of home. They become the same thing. One habit that surprises newcomers is how early dinner often happens. Daylight fades fast in winter and cooking in the dark strains eyes and patience. You eat while there is still enough light to see clearly, even if your body insists it feels like afternoon. Time bends to practicality here. You sit down with your bowl, careful not to spill. Cleaning is harder in winter. Water must be warmed. Cloth freezes stiff if left damp. You take smaller bites, not from politeness but from habit. Food lasts longer that way. Heat does too. There is something grounding about these meals. They follow rhythm rather than appetite. Morning warmth, midday maintenance, evening fuel for the night ahead. This structure steadies you when the outside world offers none. Occasionally something unexpected appears. A jar saved for a reason you no longer remember. A bit of dried fruit tucked away and forgotten. These moments feel almost extravagant. You smile without meaning to, then remind yourself not to get carried away. Winter teaches restraint even in joy. People often assume frontier diets were joyless, but that is not entirely true. Taste adjusts. Hunger sharpens appreciation. A simple stew can feel deeply satisfying when it warms hands and stomach at the same time. Pleasure does not disappear. It changes shape. You finish eating and set the bowl aside, letting the remaining heat seep into you. For a while you feel almost comfortable. This is the window you wait for. The brief stretch when food, fire and shelter align. You take advantage of it, tending to tasks that require steady hands. As the warmth fades, you notice hunger does not vanish completely. Winter eating rarely leaves you full, it leaves you fueled. There is a difference. You learn to recognize it. Fullness slows you down, fuel keeps you moving. There are stories of families stretching meals in creative ways, adding water to soups, mixing flour with whatever else was available to make it last. Some methods worked better than others, some were remembered fondly, some were remembered only as lessons not to repeat. You clean up carefully, wiping surfaces before moisture can settle. Food residue attracts trouble you do not want. Mice find warmth and crumbs easily underground. You stay ahead of them through vigilance rather than eradication. Another quiet negotiation. Later, as night deepens, you feel hunger again, faint but present. You ignore it. Eating too late makes sleep restless. You have learned this through experience. The body adjusts. It always does. Winter food teaches patience more than satisfaction. It reminds you that survival does not require abundance, it requires consistency, enough calories, enough warmth, enough care. As you bank the fire for the night, the smell of the day's meal still lingers faintly. It mixes with smoke and earth, becoming something familiar and reassuring. This scent will greet you again in the morning unchanged. You lie down and pull blankets close, stomach quiet, body steady. Outside, snow continues to reshape the land. Inside, nourishment settles into muscle and bone, doing its slow work. You think briefly of meals you once took for granted. Freshness, choice, seconds without calculation. The thought drifts away without bitterness. Comparison has little use here. What matters is that you ate, that you are warm enough, that tomorrow can begin. Food in winter dugouts does not mark celebration or leisure, it marks continuity. Another day sustained, another night possible, and as sleep approaches, that knowledge rests with you heavy and calm like the earth itself. Water becomes something you think about before you need it. That is the first lesson winter teaches you here. Thirst arrives quickly in dry, cold air, but water itself does not behave helpfully. It thickens, it stiffens, it turns against you the moment you stop paying attention. You reach for a bucket near the stove, checking it by habit. A thin skin of ice has formed across the surface, delicate but stubborn. You break it gently with your fingers, feeling the shock travel up your hand. Even inside the dugout, even near heat, water remembers winter. It always does. You learn quickly that leaving containers unattended is an invitation to trouble. Tin splits when ice expands. Wooden buckets crack along their seams. You keep water close not for convenience but for survival. The stove becomes a guardian as much as a heater. Anything that must stay liquid stays within its influence. People who lived this way learned to plan water use with the same care they planned meals, drinking, cooking, washing. Nothing happens casually. You warm what you need and no more. Excess cools too fast to justify the effort. Winter rewards restraint. You pour water into a pot and set it carefully on the stove, listening for the first quiet sounds of heat. It takes longer than you would like. Everything does in winter. You wait, hands wrapped around your elbows, breathing slow, conserving warmth. Snow lies piled outside, bright and unreachable for now. You know you could melt it if you had to, but doing so costs fuel and time. Snow is abundant but inefficient. It shrinks to almost nothing once melted, a lesson that surprises many people the first time they try. You prefer stored water when possible. It feels more dependable. There is a curious habit that appears in a few winter recollections. Some families kept small containers tucked into bedding at night, using body heat to prevent freezing. It sounds uncomfortable, and it was, but waking to liquid water mattered more than comfort. You understand the logic, even if you do not practice it yourself. As the pot warms, steam begins to rise. You lean closer, welcoming the moisture. Winter air dries skin and throat relentlessly. Lips crack. Noses sting. You sip slowly once the water is ready, letting warmth spread from the inside out. This is one of the few moments when cold loosens its grip willingly. You use warm water sparingly for washing. Hands first. Face only when necessary. Full bathing is rare in winter, not from neglect, but from calculation. Wet skin loses heat too fast. You clean what must be cleaned and leave the rest alone. Hygiene adapts to circumstance. Some later observers questioned how people endured winters with such limited washing. Others noted that expectations simply shifted. Cleanliness was measured differently. Smell mattered less than function. Health was judged by movement and breath rather than appearance. Living standards changed without ceremony. You rinse a cloth and hang it near the stove, watching it steam briefly before stiffening again. Everything moves through states here. Liquid, vapor, ice. Back again. The dugout teaches you to think in cycles rather than absolutes. Water also shapes sound. When the pot finally reaches a boil, the bubbling feels loud in the quiet room. You watch it closely, ready to pull it away before it boils too long and wastes heat. Efficiency becomes instinctive. Waste feels almost disrespectful. As the day progresses, you keep checking your containers, touching, tapping, listening for changes. You notice when water sloshes freely and when it resists movement. These cues become part of your sensory landscape. You read them the way others read clocks. There is uncertainty among those who later tried to reconstruct daily frontier life about how much water people truly consumed in winter. Some accounts suggest dehydration was common. Others imply that constant warm drinks compensated. Memory blurs details over time. You only know how your body feels when you forget to drink enough. Headaches, fatigue, a sense of heaviness that no amount of sleep fixes. As evening approaches, you warm water again, preparing for night. You set containers where they will be least affected by drafts. You bank the fire carefully, hoping it will hold long enough to keep water from freezing solid before morning. This small hope becomes part of your nightly routine. You lie down later, blankets drawn close, and listen to the stove's quiet work. Somewhere nearby, water waits, hovering between states influenced by heat and cold and attention. You drift towards sleep, knowing that if you wake thirsty in the night, you will have what you need. Outside, snow locks moisture away in solid form. Inside, you keep just enough liquid life moving to continue. This balance feels fragile but manageable. You do not conquer winter water. You negotiate with it patiently every day. As sleep comes, your throat feels calm, your hands warm enough to relax. Water has done its job. Tomorrow it will demand attention again. For now it rests held in place by fire and care, another quiet system sustaining you underground. Smell is the sense that changes first and then disappears from notice entirely. You realize this one morning when you pause near the door and catch a trace of outside air as it slips in. It feels startlingly clean. Cold, sharp, empty. When the door closes again, the dugout's familiar atmosphere settles back around you, and you understand how completely you have adapted. Inside, the air carries layers. Earth always comes first. Damp soil and grass roots pressed into walls that never fully dry. Smoke follows, faint but persistent, clinging to fabric and hair no matter how carefully you manage the stove. Then there are the softer notes. Food, wool, human presence. None of them stand out on their own anymore. Together they form the background of daily life. People living underground quickly learned that smell was not an enemy to defeat, but a condition to manage. With no windows and limited ventilation, odours had nowhere to escape. Early on, this bothered newcomers deeply. Letters home sometimes mentioned it with an embarrassment or frustration. Later entries stopped mentioning it at all. Adaptation had done its quiet work. You hang a garment near the stove, hoping to drive off dampness. Steam rises briefly, carrying scent with it, then settles back into the room. Nothing truly leaves. It only rearranges. You stop expecting freshness and start recognizing balance instead. Too much smoke signals trouble. Too much dampness signals risk. Everything else fades into familiarity. There is a small comfort in this. Smell becomes a kind of continuity marker. When the dugout smells the way it always does, you know things are stable. Fire is working, food is available, No sudden disaster has introduced a new alarming scent. Normal has a smell and you recognize it instantly. One small habit shows up repeatedly in winter recollections. People burned bits of sage cedar or whatever aromatic plant they could find, not as ceremony but as refreshment. It did not remove odours. It layered over them, offering brief variety. You understand the appeal. Even a momentary change feels meaningful when everything else remains the same. You notice how smell affects memory here. A pot of stew can recall summer gardens. Damp wool brings back shearing season. Smoke carries images of other fires, other winters. In a space this small scent becomes a storyteller drifting through the room long after the source is gone. There were disagreements later among those trying to describe dugout life about whether the smell was truly oppressive or simply unfamiliar. Some accounts describe it as unbearable. Others barely mention it. The difference likely came down to expectation. What you believe a home should smell like shapes how you experience it. Out here, expectation changes quickly. You wipe a surface again more out of habit than necessity. Cleanliness is relative. You cannot scrub earthed walls smooth. You cannot banish smoke entirely. Instead, you focus on what matters, keeping bedding dry, keeping food sealed, keeping pests discouraged. These goals guide your actions far more than any abstract standard of cleanliness. The dugout responds. When moisture drops, smells soften. When fire burns cleanly, smoke recedes. The space feels calmer even if nothing visible has changed. You trust these cues now. They tell you when something needs attention long before discomfort sets in. As the day moves on, you barely register the air anymore. It is simply there, surrounding you, carrying warmth and sound. This loss of awareness might seem troubling, but it is a sign of adjustment. The body stops flagging what it no longer considers urgent. Visitors, if you have any notice, immediately. They wrinkle noses. They comment politely or not at all. You see yourself through their reactions for a brief moment, then let it go. They will leave soon. You will remain. Their discomfort does not change your reality. Some families made small efforts to improve air quality. Short vents dug upward. Doors opened briefly during calm weather. These measures helped a little but never fully transformed the space. Complete freshness was not achievable. Instead, people learned to live with what they had created. You sit near the stove and breathe deeply without thinking about it. That more than anything tells you how far you have come. What once felt heavy now feels normal. The dugout has taught your senses new baselines. As evening approaches, you notice the air shifts slightly, cooler, heavier. Night always brings a change. Smells settle lower. Smoke lingers longer. You adjust the fire and prepare for sleep, moving through familiar steps without reflection. There is something quietly humbling about this adaptation. It reminds you that comfort is not fixed. It moves with circumstance. Given enough time, the body learns what to ignore and what to heed. Later, wrapped in blankets, you inhale and exhale steadily. The air carries everything you need to survive. Warmth, moisture, familiarity. Outside, the prairie smells of snow and wind and distance. Inside, the dugout smells of endurance. You drift towards sleep without comment or complaint. The scent of earth and smoke no longer signals hardship. It signals shelter. Another night enclosed. Another day managed. And as your breathing slows, you realize something subtle. You do not miss fresh air the way you once did. You miss warmth when it fades. You miss light when it dims. Smell has receded into the background, a quiet companion rather than an intrusion. The dugout has reshaped not just your routines, but your senses. It has taught you what matters most and what can safely be let go. Wrapped in that understanding, you rest held by earth and habit, drifting deeper into the steady rhythm of winter underground. Clothing stops being something you put on and take off. It becomes something you live inside. You wake already dressed in layers from the night before, shrugging into movement rather than changing outfits. Fabric holds yesterday's warmth and yesterday's work, and you accept both without comment. You start with what touches scare, soft when possible, repaired when not. Shirts thin at the elbows, collars rubbed smooth by repetition. Over that comes weight. Wool if you have it, because wool forgives dampness. better than anything else you know. Cotton when you must, though it clings cold and heavy once moisture finds it. Every layer has a purpose. None are decorative. By midwinter, everyone understands this quietly. Clothing is insulation first and identity second. People learned fast that appearances mattered less than heat retention. A mismatched sleeve, a patched knee, a coat passed down and altered beyond recognition. These are not signs of neglect. They are signs of continuity. You tug a jacket tighter and feel how movement is restricted. Arms do not swing freely anymore. Bending takes effort. Sitting requires adjustment so fabric does not bunch and steal warmth. You learn new ways to move slower and more deliberate. Speed belongs to warmer places. One odd habit emerges in cold months. People slept wearing tomorrow's clothes to save time and warmth at dawn. It feels uncomfortable at first. Fabric twisting as you turn, but the relief of not dressing in freezing air outweighs the irritation. You adopt the practice without ceremony. It simply makes sense. Moisture is the enemy you watch for. Snow melts into cuffs. Breath dampens scarves. Sweat turns treacherous if you work too hard indoors. You open layers, carefully venting heat without exposing skin too much. This balance takes practice. Overheat and you chill later. Stay too cool and stiffness settles in. It never became entirely clear to those who lived this way, whether constant layering strengthened bodies or quietly wore them down. Some felt hardened by it. Others felt older than their years. You feel both possibilities in yourself. Muscles adapt, joints complain. The body learns, but it remembers the cost. You hang garments near the stove, turning them often so one side does not scorch while the other stays damp. The air fills with steam, briefly then settles. Clothing never fully dries in winter. It only improves enough to be worn again. Gloves matter more than anything else. Fingers lose function quickly in cold, and once numb, everything slows. You keep gloves close, repair them often. A small tear becomes urgent here. Thread and needle are survival tools as much as comfort items. Some families lined coats with newspaper or extra cloth building insulation where they could. Others stitched hidden pockets to tuck hands into when gloves failed. These quiet modifications rarely made it into official records, but they show up in memory and habit. You find yourself doing similar things without naming them as solutions. They are simply adjustments. Boots demand constant attention. Soles crack. Seams leak. You dry them slowly, knowing heat too close will ruin leather. Frozen boots in the morning are a trial you avoid when possible. You tap them, flex them, negotiate with them until they soften enough to accept your feet. As the day wears on, clothing shifts and settles. Heat builds under layers, then fades when you stop moving. You learn to anticipate this. Before sitting, you pull fabric tighter. Before standing, you loosen it slightly. These gestures become unconscious. There is a strange intimacy in wearing the same things day after day. Fabric shapes to your body. Seams settle where you bend most. Clothes begin to feel less like objects and more like extensions. You notice immediately when something is missing or altered. You wonder sometimes whether this closeness to clothing changes how people thought about themselves. When survival depends on what you wear, vanity loses its edge. Identity becomes quieter. You are warm or you are cold, functional or struggling. Labels feel distant. At night you peel off only what you must. Boots come off. Outer layers loosen. Inner garments remain. You crawl into bed already wrapped, already prepared. The bed becomes just another layer, not a separate space. You stretch fingers, rubbing warmth back into joints and feel fabric move with you. Everything you wear has earned its place. Nothing is extra. Outside, snow reflects light harshly indifferent to what you have layered against it. Inside your clothing forms a portable shelter, shifting and adapting as needed. It does not defeat winter. It slows it. As you settle near the stove, adjusting sleeves one last time, you realize something quietly important. Clothing here is not about facing the world. It is about negotiating with it. Each layer is an agreement. You will move carefully, Winter will ease slightly. Not much, just enough. You accept that bargain without resentment. Wrapped in wool and habit, you continue through the day carrying your shelter with you one layer at a time. Illness does not announce itself dramatically here. It slips in quietly, disguised as fatigue or a lingering chill you assume will pass. In a dugout, everything feels cold at first, so it takes time to realize when cold has crossed into something else. A cough stays longer than expected. Fingers ache even when the fire burns well. You notice these things, file them away and keep moving. Space makes sickness feel closer. There is nowhere to retreat to be alone. No separate room to isolate yourself. Every breath is shared air. Every surface is shared space. You become aware of how often you touch the same places. Door latch, stove handle, water dipper. Habit forms pathways illness can follow. You sit near the fire, listening to a shallow cough echo softly against the earthen walls. It could be nothing. It often is. Winter makes voices rough and throats dry. Still you watch it. Everyone does. Attention becomes a kind of early warning system. By this point in the season, most people understood something without ever writing it down. Getting sick in winter was less about sudden exposure, more about slow depletion. Too many cold mornings, too many nights with the fire fading early, too many days without proper rest. Illness came when reserves ran low. You adjust routines when you can, you rest longer in the morning, you save heavier work for warmer hours, you drink more warm water even when you are not thirsty. These are small decisions, but they add up. Winter health is built on accumulation, not cures. One curious habit appears in winter stories from the plains. People sometimes kept a scarf or cloth over their mouth indoors, not for modesty, but to warm the air before breathing it in. It looks strange at first. Then you notice your chest feels less tight. You adopt the habit without thinking twice. The dugout itself plays a role. Dampness settles into joints, smoke irritates lungs, low light strains eyes. None of these things cause illness on their own, but together they wear at you. You feel it most in the evenings when exhaustion spreads unevenly through your body. It was never entirely clear to those who lived through it whether underground living protected them from sickness or made it worse. The earth shielded against wind and extreme cold, but it also trapped moisture and air. Some people swore dugouts kept them healthier. Others blamed them for every ache that lingered into spring. You suspect both views came from lived truth. You notice how people care for each other differently in winter. Voices lower when someone coughs. Tasks are redistributed quietly. No announcements are made. Assistance arrives in the form of a mug set nearby, a chore handled without comment. This is how care looks when energy is scarce. Children feel illness differently here. Fevers seem brighter against the dim walls. Restlessness echoes more sharply in more tight spaces. Adults watch closely, adjusting blankets, warming stones, whispering reassurance. Winter amplifies concern, not because danger is always greater, but because options are fewer. You rest when you can, leaning back near the stove, eyes half closed. Heat seeps into muscles slowly. You let it. Productivity loosens its grip here. Staying well matters more than staying busy. There is a subtle change in how time moves when sickness enters the space. Days feel longer, sounds sharper. You count hours by breaths and tasks rather than light. Patience stretches, everyone slows without being told. Some people relied on remedies passed along quietly. Teas brewed from stored herbs, honey saved for sore throats, warm compresses wrapped carefully. Whether these helped physically or simply offered comfort is hard to say, but comfort matters. In winter, reassurance carries weight. You think about how modern ideas of illness revolve around intervention, medicine, isolation, treatment plans. Here, illness is something you live alongside and manage with what you have. You adapt routines, you conserve warmth, you listen closely to your body. As the night deepens, you notice the cough easing slightly. Or perhaps you notice your attention easing. Either way, tension lifts a fraction. You adjust blankets and settle back, letting rest do what it can. Illness teaches restraint in the same way winter does. You learn when to push and when to pause. You accept that not everything can be fixed quickly. Sometimes it simply needs time and warmth. You wake the next morning feeling no worse. That is a victory, not dramatic, not announced, just quietly noted as you rise and tend the fire again. The dugout does not eliminate sickness, it does not guarantee health, but it teaches awareness. It teaches you to listen to subtle changes and respond before they grow loud. As you move through the day, you feel steadier, breath deeper, muscles looser. Whatever threatened has receded for now. Winter remains. The work continues. You accept this rhythm, watchfulness, adjustment, care given without ceremony. Health here is not a permanent state. It is a balance you rebuild daily, like fire and warmth within the shelter of earth and attention. Loneliness behaves differently in winter. It is not always the sharp ache people imagine. More often it is a low, steady presence, like the cold itself, something you feel most clearly when you stop moving. In a dugout, isolation and closeness exist at the same time, pressing in from opposite sides. You sit close to others because space demands it. Knees almost touch, voices stay low. You learn the small sounds people make when they are tired or irritated or simply thinking. There is no escaping one another here, not really. Every mood circulates through the room the way air does. Shared space means shared emotional weather. And yet beyond these walls there is almost nothing. Neighbours are miles away. Paths disappear under snow. Days pass without seeing another face beyond the ones already beside you. This contrast sharpens awareness. You are never alone and you are rarely connected to the wider world. Both truths sit together without resolving. You notice how a conversation changes under these conditions. Words become fewer but heavier. Small talk fades. What remains is practical or personal. Plans, worries, memories told more than once. Stories become familiar, but repetition brings comfort rather than boredom. Familiar voices anchor time when days blur together. By midwinter, many people discovered that loneliness did not come from being physically alone, but from feeling unseen. In a dugout, everyone sees you constantly. There is little room to disappear. That visibility can feel comforting or exhausting depending on the day. You learn to manage it the way you manage everything else, with patience and restraint. One small but telling habit appears in winter accounts. People stepped outside alone at night more often than necessary, not to go anywhere but to feel distance briefly. Standing under the open sky, even for a moment, restored a sense of self that closeness sometimes eroded. You try it once wrapped tightly, breathing cold air until your chest tightens, then retreat gratefully underground again. Silence becomes valuable. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of agreement. Long stretches pass where no one speaks and no one expects anyone to. The crackle of the stove fills the gap. The sound of wind above completes it. These shared silences knit people together in ways conversation cannot. At the same time, tempers shorten. Small irritations magnify. A repeated noise, a habit that once felt harmless. You notice these things and choose carefully whether to react. Winter teaches emotional economy. Some frustrations are not worth the heat they would cost to express. There was never a single understanding among people who lived this way about whether dugout life strengthened relationships or strained them. Some felt bonds deepen under shared hardship. Others remembered tension and resentment that lingered long after winter ended. You sense how easily either outcome could take root. The environment amplifies whatever already exists. Children experience this closeness differently. They adapt quickly, turning tight quarters into games, boundaries into challenges. Adults watch and feel both relief and fatigue. Laughter helps. So does routine. Familiar tasks give structure to relationships that might otherwise fray. You find yourself craving small markers of individuality. A moment alone near the stove. A walk outside even when it is unnecessary. A task claimed as yours alone. These acts are not rejections of community. They are maintenance. Just as the stove needs tending, so does the self. As evening comes, closeness increases again. Bodies cluster near heat, voices soften, stories return. You listen, adding comments when needed, letting others carry the thread when you are tired. Participation fluctuates. No one keeps score. Later, lying in bed, you become aware of breathing around you. The rhythm is uneven but comforting. It reminds you that you are not bearing winter alone, even if the wider world feels distant. Shared warmth is not just physical, it is emotional too. You think about how modern loneliness often comes from being surrounded by people yet feeling disconnected. Here, connection is unavoidable. Whether it satisfies depends on patience and care. You adjust your expectations the same way you adjust your clothing. Layered, flexible, responsive. Outside, the prairie stretches empty and silent. Inside, presence fills the dugout completely. You exist between these extremes, learning how to hold both without losing yourself. As sleep approaches, the tension between isolation and closeness loosens. The day's interactions fade into background warmth. What remains is a sense of being held not just by earth and walls, but by shared endurance. Loneliness does not vanish here. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, woven into routine rather than standing apart. You accept it as part of winter, another condition to manage rather than defeat. Wrapped in blankets, listening to familiar sounds, you rest. Tomorrow will bring the same closeness, the same distance, the same careful balance, and you will meet it again, steady and patient within the small, crowded shelter that has become your world. Night sounds grow louder once you stop trying to name them. During the day, every noise feels practical. A pot set down, wood shifting, boots scraping dirt. At night, those familiar cues fade and what remains feels less certain. The dugout listens with you, collecting sounds from above and around, reshaping them into something softer, but harder to interpret. You lie still, eyes open, and hear the earth work. A faint crack somewhere overhead as frozen ground tightens. A soft slide of snow slipping free. The stove ticks as metal cools. None of these sounds are new yet. At night they feel closer, as if the darkness pulls them inward. Your imagination notices this immediately. It stretches into the quiet and fills the gaps. Was that wind or something brushing the door? Did the ceiling just shift, or was that only your breath changing pace? You wait a moment. Nothing follows. The room settles again. Animals move differently in winter. You hear them sometimes muffled and distant. A scuffle, a pause, then silence. Most keep their distance from human shelter, but curiosity still exists. Mice especially seem to understand warmth. You stay alert for the faint scratch that signals unwanted company. Traps are checked often. Food is sealed carefully. Vigilance becomes part of rest. One small habit appears during long winter nights. People learn to identify sounds by repetition. If a noise occurred every night and never led to trouble, it lost its power. The mind stopped responding. What remained were the unfamiliar sounds, the ones that broke pattern. Those earned attention. You realize how quickly you have learnt this yourself. A certain creak means nothing. A certain rush of air means the wind has shifted. A certain sense means snow is packed tight against the door. You do not analyze these cues. You feel them. At times your thoughts wander into strange shapes. The dark encourages this. Without visual anchors, the mind moves freely. You imagine the land above you, frozen grass bending under snow moonlight reflecting off drifts. You imagine how small the dugout must look from a distance, nearly invisible against the prairie. That invisibility feels both comforting and unsettling. There are nights when dreams begin before sleep fully arrives. Images drift through without commitment. Past places, familiar voices, half-remembered conversations. You do not try to control them. You let them pass, trusting that rest will come eventually. Some people later described winter nights as the hardest part of dugout life, not because of danger, but because of mental noise. With work finished and movement limited, thoughts had room to echo. Others remembered these hours as peaceful, a rare pause from constant labour. Your experience shifts between the two depending on the day you have had. You adjust blankets and feel the bed respond. Straw rustles softly, fabric settles. These sounds reassure you. They are a close, controllable part of your immediate world. You focus on them when your thoughts drift too far outward. The wind rises again, briefly pressing against the surface. It sounds like a long breath drawn across the roof. You wait for the follow-through. It fades. The storm does not commit to night. You relax a fraction. There is something about night that magnifies uncertainty. During the day you see problems coming. At night you feel them instead. The dugout limits vision but sharpens other senses. You listen harder. You notice subtle changes in air pressure. You sense when the fire needs attention without looking at it. You get up once to tend the stove, moving slowly so as not to wake anyone else. The floor is cold, the air cooler than before. You add fuel gently and wait for the response. Flame catches. Heat begins its slow climb. Satisfied, you return to bed. Lying back down, you notice how the room sounds different now. The stove's quiet hum fills space that once felt empty. Night becomes less abstract when warmth is present. Sound and heat work together to create reassurance. Sometimes you hear nothing at all. Those moments feel strange. Absolute quiet presses against your ears until you become aware of your own heartbeat. Even breathing sounds loud. You wonder if silence itself is a sign of danger. Then you remember that snow absorbs sound. Heavy snow means quiet. Quiet means insulation. The thought calms you. Your mind drifts to stories you have heard, tales of storms collapsing roofs, of animals digging in, of people losing direction in blizzards. You do not dwell on these. Fear without action serves no purpose. Instead, you return attention to what you can confirm. The roof feels solid. The fire burns. Breath flows easily. Night teaches trust, not blind trust, but earned trust. You have survived many nights already. Each one adds weight to the belief that you will survive this one too. The dugout has held. The routines have worked. Eventually the sounds soften again. The wind settles. Snow finishes moving. The room enters a deeper stillness. You feel sleep approaching, not as a repulsion, but as a gradual loosening. Your thoughts slow. Images lose clarity. Sounds merge. The dugout becomes a single presence rather than a collection of details: earth, fire, breath. As sleep takes hold, you no longer track individual noises. You float above them, carried by familiarity. Whatever moves out, I will do so without needing your attention tonight. Wrapped in warmth and darkness, you let the night continue its quiet work. The prairie listens above you. The dugout listens with you. And between them you rest, learning how to let sound pass without fear, how to allow imagination to soften instead of sharpen. Morning will come, officially announced, not by light, but by readiness. For now you remain here suspended in the low, steady music of winter. Winter underground. Work never really ends here. It only changes its distance from you. During the day, labour pulls you outward into motion. At night it settles back into the room, waiting quietly. You feel it when you wake, not as urgency, but as presence. Tasks line the walls. Tools lean where you last set them down. Tomorrow is already inches away. You sit up and stretch, slowly testing stiffness. Muscles respond reluctantly, as if reminding you they have already done enough. Still you move. You always do. In winter, work is not something you chase. It stays close, patient, impossible to ignore. The dugout makes this unavoidable. There is no separation between home and labour, no door to close on responsibility. Repairs happen where you sleep. Supplies share space with bedding. Even rest feels provisional, borrowed between duties rather than protected from them. You notice how this shapes your thinking. There is less procrastination, but also less anticipation. Tasks exist as facts. Wood needs splitting. A seam needs mending. Water needs warming. You do not dramatize these things. You do them when warmth and light allow. During winter, people learn to bring work inward whenever possible. Tools were repaired by the stove. Harnesses were checked and softened by hand. Anything that could be done without stepping into the cold was saved for indoors. The dugout became a workshop of small, careful motions. One habit shows up in the way you organize space. Objects are kept where they can be reached without standing fully. Bending costs heat. Stretching costs balance. You arrange your world so effort stays contained. This is not laziness, it is strategy. As the fire builds, you choose a task that suits the moment. Something steady, something quiet. You sit with it, hands moving rhythmically. There is satisfaction here, but it is muted. Work is not celebrated, it is absorbed into the background of the day. You feel how fatigue accumulates differently in winter. It is not the sharp exhaustion of heavy labour, but a slow draining that eats into bones. Rest helps, but never fully resets you. Each day borrows a little from the next. You learn to pace yourself, to stop before tiredness becomes weakness. It remains uncertain whether this constant closeness to work hardened people or wore them thin. Some remembered winter as a time of focus and purpose. Others recalled it as unrelenting. You feel both interpretations tugging at you. Some days routine steadies you. Other days it presses too tightly. You pause and warm your hands, flexing fingers near the stove. The heat loosens joints just enough for it to continue. You return to your task knowing that stopping too often cools you faster than continuing. The sounds of work fill the dugout, soft scraping, fabric pulling, wood tapping lightly. These sounds are familiar grounding. They replace the larger noises of the outside world, shrinking life to a manageable scale. There is a strange comfort in this nearness. You never feel idle, even rest feels earned, because work waits visibly nearby. At the same time, there is no escape from it. Dreams sometimes carry the shape of unfinished tasks. You wake already planning without meaning to. As daylight fades, you set work aside reluctantly. Light matters now. Mistakes cost energy. You organize tools carefully, placing them where tomorrow's hands will find them easily. Preparation becomes a form of kindness toward your future self. Evening brings a softer kind of labour. Planning, checking, thinking through what might be needed if weather shifts overnight. You run through possibilities quietly. Extra fuel, water closer to heat, boots positioned carefully. These small acts reduce risk more than any bold gesture. You lie down later with the awareness that nothing is fully done, and yet enough is done. The dugout is stable, the fire burns, the tools rest, work can wait until morning. This constant proximity to labour changes your relationship with time. There is no clear boundary between hours spent and hours saved. Everything blends. You stop measuring days by accomplishment and start measuring them by continuity. Outside, winter holds the land in stillness. Inside, effort continues in small, steady pulses. The two coexist without conflict. You do what must be done and the rest waits. As sleep approaches, you let go of the unfinished edges. Work will return soon enough. For now, the dugout offers a pause, not an ending. You accept it gratefully, settling into rest with tomorrow's tasks already quietly in place. Children adapt faster than adults, or at least that is how it appears. You watch it happen in small ways. They duck instinctively beneath the low ceiling. They know where not to step. They understand which corners belong to quiet and which belong to play. The dugout does not feel temporary to them. It feels complete. They wake without complaint, already used to dim light and cool air. Cold hands are normal. Stiff clothes are expected. What once felt like hardship to you has already become background for them. They move easily in layers, turning bulk into momentum rather than burden. Learning happens by observation here. There is no space for formal lessons, no desk set aside for instruction. Instead, children watch hands work and copy the motions later. Knots, stitches, fire tending. These skills settle into muscle memory before they ever become words. Winter accelerates this process. When mistakes matter, attention sharpens. One small detail appears in how children treat the space itself. They mark it mentally, not physically. They remember where warmth pools, where drafts slip in, Where sound echoes, the dugout becomes a map they carry internally. You realize they navigate it more confidently than you do. Play adapts as well. Games shrink, movements soften, noise becomes controlled. A dropped object sounds louder underground, so care replaces chaos. Even laughter adjusts lower and more contained. This is not suppression. It is instinctive cooperation with the environment. People often assume childhood requires openness and freedom to thrive. Here, freedom looks different. It shows up in imagination. Stories told in the half-light. Objects repurposed endlessly. A stick becomes a tool, then a toy, then part of a game that exists only for an afternoon. Scarcity sharpens creativity rather than dulling it. You notice how children respond to storms. While adults track risk and outcome, children listen for rhythm. Wind becomes sound, so it becomes texture. Fear exists, but it is less layered. They take cues from the room itself. If the dugout remains calm, they do too. There was never a single understanding later about how growing up underground shaped people long term. Some recalled it as grounding. Others remembered feeling confined. The truth likely changed from person to person. You can see both possibilities unfolding already. Resilience forming alongside restlessness. Illness worries you more when it touches children. Fevers feel brighter, coughs sound sharper. You respond quickly, adjusting blankets, warming water, staying close. Children accept this care easily. Closeness is their baseline. They do not question it. You notice how winter accelerates maturity. Tasks are shared sooner. Responsibility arrives early. Children understand the importance of small contributions because they see how easily imbalance can tip the room toward discomfort. Carrying water, holding light, keeping still when needed. These acts matter. At night, children fall asleep faster than adults. Their bodies surrender to rest without negotiation. Dreams come quickly. You watch them breathe steady and deep, wrapped in layers they did not choose but have learned to trust. Sometimes they wake and ask questions about spring, about snow, about why the world outside feels so far away. You answer gently, without certainty. Winter teaches you not to promise too much. Children seem to accept this storing questions rather than demanding answers. Morning brings movement again. Children stretch, rub eyes, reach for familiar objects. The dugout wakes with them. They do not mourn what they have not known. They build their sense of normal from what surrounds them. You realize then that winter dugout life is shaping not just bodies but expectations. What feels like endurance to you feels like structure to them. What you count as survival, they count as life. This awareness brings a quiet mix of pride and unease. You're keeping them warm, you're keeping them fed, but you also wonder what memories will linger longest, the closeness, the darkness, the rhythm of fire and cold. As the day unfolds, children weave themselves into routine effortlessly. They are not waiting for winter to end in the same way you are. They live inside it, fully adjusting without resistance. Watching them, you understand something essential. Adaptation is not only about strength, it is about acceptance. Children accept first and question later. Adults often reverse the order. The dugout continues its quiet lessons. Low ceilings teach awareness. Cold teaches preparation. Darkness teaches listening. Children absorb these lessons without naming them. As evening returns, they settle close again. Voices, soft movements, careful. The dugout holds all of you together, shaping childhood in ways that will be remembered long after the walls themselves return to earth. You lie down later, listening to their steady breathing, and feel both the weight and purpose of winter settle over you again. The season is demanding, but it is also teaching, and for them these lessons are becoming second nature. You notice the work that holds everything together most clearly when it pauses. A pot not washed, a seam left undone, a fire left untended for just a little too long. Winter has a way of pointing out these gaps without raising its voice. The dugout responds quickly to neglect and just as quickly to care. Much of that care happens quietly without discussion. You see it in the way hands move automatically towards tasks that need doing. Bedding shaken and turned, ashes cleared before they spill, water repositioned closer to heat. None of this feels dramatic, it feels necessary, like breathing. There is a rhythm to domestic work here that has nothing to do with clocks. It follows heat, light, energy. When the stove is strong, heavier tasks happen. When warmth fades, movements slow and narrow. The day shapes itself around these conditions and you move with it rather than against it. You become aware of how much attention goes into keeping the space livable. Dirt floors swept smooth so they do not hold dampness. Walls wiped where condensation gathers too often. Food stored carefully to avoid waste and intrusion. These acts repeat daily, quietly reinforcing stability. One subtle pattern emerges over time. Certain people take responsibility for certain details without ever claiming them. Someone always checks the fire before sleep. Someone always folds blankets just so. Someone always notices when supplies run low. Roles settle naturally, shaped by temperament rather than rule. This kind of labour rarely announces itself. It does not produce visible progress the way building or harvesting does. Instead, it prevents decline. That makes it easy to overlook even by those who benefit from it. You catch yourself. Taking warmth for granted, then remember how much effort keeps it steady. The dugout magnifies this awareness. There is nowhere for disorder to hide. A small lapse affects the whole space. A damp blanket chills everyone. A forgotten ember smokes the room. Responsibility feels shared even when tasks are individual. You think about how different this is from larger homes where mess can be isolated, ignored, postponed. Here, everything is immediate. This creates tension sometimes. It also creates attentiveness. You learn to notice small shifts before they grow into problems. At times, fatigue dulls patience. A task feels endless because it must be repeated tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Winter stretches time this way, turning maintenance into a horizon that never quite arrives. You feel this weariness most in the evenings when light fades and the room cools. Still, the work continues. You do not frame it as sacrifice, you frame it as survival. Each small action buys another night of comfort, another morning, paying without crisis. The reward is subtle but reliable. You see how this work shapes relationships. Gratitude appears rarely as words. It appears as trust, as expectation that things will be handled, as quiet relief when they are. Resentment builds only when effort goes unseen for too long. Sometimes someone pauses and rests and nothing falls apart. That too teaches a lesson. Not every task is urgent. Some can wait. Knowing the difference matters as much as diligence itself. As the day moves on, you find yourself performing these tasks almost without thought. Hands move, eyes scan, adjustments happen. The dugout feels steady because of this constant invisible attention. Later, as you sit near the stove, warmth settling into your back, you feel a small satisfaction that does not ask to be celebrated. The space feels balanced. Air moves gently, nothing demands immediate correction. This balance is temporary, it always is, but for now it holds. You understand then that winter survival here depends less on heroic effort than on continuous care, on noticing what others might overlook, on acting before discomfort becomes danger. As evening approaches, the routine repeats. Fire checked, water set, bedding prepared. The dugout settles again into readiness for night. You lie down knowing that tomorrow will ask for the same attention, the same quiet labour, and you will give it not because you enjoy repetition, but because it works. In this way, the dugout teaches a lesson that extends beyond winter. Stability is not built once. It is rebuilt daily through small, careful acts that rarely earn recognition but always matter. Wrapped in blankets, listening to familiar sounds, you rest inside the result of that work. The walls hold, the fire hums, the space remains livable. For tonight, that is enough. You begin to notice how endurance wears different faces. Some people grow quieter as winter drags on. Others become more talkative, filling the small space with words as if to push back against the season. You watch these shifts without comment, understanding that everyone carries strain in their own way. Pride shows itself subtly here, not in boasts but in persistence, in getting up when the floor feels especially cold, in stepping outside when the wind still has teeth, in choosing to do one more task before resting even when no one is watching. This quiet pride shapes behaviour more than any spoken rule. Men in particular seem to measure themselves against winter without saying so. You see it in how long they stay outside clearing snow, in how they handle tools with bare hands just a little longer than necessary, in the way discomfort is treated as something to move through rather than around. It is not competition exactly, it is testing. You notice the cost of this too. Shoulders stiffen, backs ache longer. Silence stretches when words would help. Winter rewards endurance but does not forgive excess. Learning where to stop becomes as important as learning how to persist. Inside the dugout, the space equalizes things. No one can fully withdraw, no one can dominate without consequence. Every movement affects someone else. Pride softens here, reshaped by proximity. You learn quickly that toughness means little if it disrupts the balance everyone relies on. There are moments when frustration leaks through. A sharp tone, a sigh held too long. These moments pass, quickly absorbed by routine. No one has the energy for prolonged conflict. Winter demands cooperation more than agreement. You notice how strength is redefined. It is no longer about speed or force, it is about consistency, about showing up again tomorrow, about doing the necessary thing even when it feels small and repetitive. This kind of strength rarely looks impressive, but it keeps the dugout functional. Some evenings, stories surface, not grand tales, but small recollections of past winters. Other places, different hardships. These stories are not told to compare suffering. They are told to remind everyone that endurance has precedent. Others have lived through difficulty before. That knowledge carries weight. You listen and realize that pride here is often tied to memory. Surviving becomes part of identity, not announced but remembered. Each winter adds another layer to that memory, thickening it like clothing. At the same time, vulnerability finds space. Fatigue lowers defenses. Illness humbles. Cold equalizes. You see moments when toughness gives way to honesty. A request for help. A pause instead of pushing through. These moments strengthen trust rather than weaken it. The dugout holds all of this without judgment. It does not reward bravado, it responds only to action. Fire burns when fed. Cold returns when ignored. The space teaches fairness through consequence. As night approaches, energy fades. Movement slow. Pride rests. No one needs to prove anything now. Survival for the day is complete. You lie down and reflect on how winter has reshaped expectations. Strength feels quieter. Endurance feels shared. Pride no longer needs an audience. Outside the prairie remains indifferent. Inside, human effort continues measured not by spectacle but by steadiness. You fall asleep understanding that living through winter here is not about winning against nature. It is about lasting alongside it day after day without losing the small kindnesses that make endurance possible. Distance reshapes meaning in winter. Miles stretch longer when snow fills every low place and wind erases tracks as fast as you make them. You think of neighbours often not because you expect to see them, but because their absence becomes a presence of its own. Somewhere out there, beyond the white and the wind, other dugouts sit quietly holding their own pockets of warmth. Contact becomes intentional. You do not wander casually. Every trip is planned, weighed against weather and daylight. When someone does appear at the door, it feels momentous. The sound of boots outside breaks the dugout's rhythm and everyone looks up at once. Visitors bring news, yes, but more than that, they bring proof that the world still moves. You prepare for these moments without quite admitting it. Extra wood stacked near the stove, a pot kept ready, space cleared. Hospitality in winter is not about abundance, it is about sharing heat. Bodies cluster closer, conversation fills the room more quickly. For a while the dugout feels larger than it is. Between visits, community becomes something you imagine rather than experience. You picture others tending fires, banking stoves, listening to the same wind you hear now. This shared imagining creates connection even when physical distance remains unchanged. Knowing that others endure the same conditions steadies you. Messages travel slowly, news arrives out of sequence. A storm that buried one place may have missed another entirely. You learn not to expect synchronicity. Each dugout becomes its own island, shaped by the same season but not the same moments. You think about trust differently here. When help is far away, reliability matters more than proximity. You remember who helped last year, who showed up when needed. These memories carry forward, quietly shaping future cooperation. Sometimes you prepare to travel and then decide not to. Weather shifts, light fades faster than expected. Turning back feels disappointing at first, then wise. Winter rewards restraint. Community survives not through bold gestures but through careful timing. Inside the dugout you speak of others often. Names recur, stories repeat. This keeps relationships alive across distance. Absence is softened by memory and anticipation. You hold space for people you cannot see. When spring finally returns, these distances will shrink again. Paths will reappear, visits will become easier. For now, winter stretches the land and thins contact. You adapt by carrying community inward, keeping it alive through thought and preparation. As night falls, you imagine lights flickering in other dugouts, fires tended by hands you know. The thought brings warmth that no stove can provide. Distance remains, but connection endures, stretched thin yet unbroken across the frozen prairie. Weather becomes the final authority without ever asking for the role. You do not debate it. You do not negotiate. You respond. That is all. Each morning begins with listening rather than deciding. You feel for the temperature before you fully wake. You note the sound of wind through soil and sod. You decide what kind of day it will be based on what the air allows. Plans shrink accordingly. Some days the world invites movement. Others it closes ranks and insists you stay where you are. You learn not to resent this. Resistance only wastes energy. Winter teaches compliance without submission. You are not giving up control. You are acknowledging reality. You open the door cautiously and let cold test your face, and if it bites too sharply, the door closes again without ceremony. Outside work can wait. Inside work always exists. This simple decision keeps you alive more reliably than optimism ever could. Storms arrive with little warning. The sky shifts colour. Wind sharpens. Snow begins to fall sideways rather than down. When this happens, the dugout becomes your entire world again. You bank the fire higher. You move supplies closer. You prepare to wait. There is something strangely calming about surrendering decision-making to weather. When conditions dictate everything, choice becomes simpler. You do not weigh preferences. You follow necessity. This reduces mental strain in a way you did not expect. You notice how the dugout responds to weather before you do. Walls cool faster when cold deepens. The stove behaves differently under pressure changes. Even sound shifts. You learn to read these cues like signals. The space warns you gently. Some days the weather surprises you by easing unexpectedly. Wind drops, light improves. You seize these moments quickly. Snow is cleared. Paths are reinforced. Tasks that require stepping out are completed with urgency. You do not assume the kindness will last. Other days the world remains locked down. Snow piles against the door. Wind presses steadily. The dugout hums softly with heat and breath. Waiting becomes work of its own. Patience stretches. Time slows. You realize that authority here is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply acts. Weather reshapes your behavior without argument. You respond instinctively now without frustration. As evening approaches, you listen again. Conditions may change overnight. You prepare for multiple outcomes. Extra fuel within reach. Water positioned carefully. Boots ready but not assumed. Readiness becomes habit. Lying down later, you accept that tomorrow will arrive already decided in some ways. This acceptance brings relief, responsibility arrows, survival becomes straightforward straightforward. Outside, the prairie continues its quiet enforcement. Inside, you align yourself with it. This alignment keeps you alive. You drift towards sleep knowing that winter does not demand courage or defiance. It demands attention, and you have learned how to give it. Comfort arrives in pieces so small you almost miss them. It is not a blanket feeling, not a state you reach and stay in. It appears briefly, then slips away, then returns again when you are not looking for it. Winter trains you to notice these moments without clinging to them. You feel it when the stove settles into a steady burn and stops demanding attention. The metal hums softly, neither starving nor roaring. Heat spreads just enough to loosen your shoulders. You pause, hands resting in your lap, and let that ease sink in before moving again. Another moment comes when a cup warms your palms. Not even what is inside it matters as much as the sensation itself. Fingers thaw. Circulation returns. The simple act of holding something warm feels luxurious in a way you never expected. You sip slowly, extending the moment as long as you can. You notice comfort in sound as well. The familiar rhythm of the dugout at rest. Fire breathing, wind muffled, footsteps above absent. These sounds tell you that nothing needs immediate fixing. For a while, the space is balanced. People who lived this way learned quickly that comfort could not be pursued directly. Trying too hard for it usually backfired. Extra fuel burned too fast. Too many layers caused sweating. Overcorrection invited discomfort later. Instead, comfort came from restraint and timing. You sit closer to others without comment, drawn by shared warmth. No one announces the reason. Bodies simply cluster where heat is strongest. A shoulder brushes another. Knees align. This closeness feels natural now. It no longer feels like a loss of space. There is a small pleasure in routine done well. A blanket folded just right so it traps heat. Boots placed where they will not freeze stiff. Water positioned within reach. These details reduce friction. Less effort is required later. That reduction feels like comfort too. Occasionally something breaks the pattern in a pleasant way. A song remembered, a story told at the right moment, laughter that comes easily and fades without effort. These moments brighten the space briefly, then leave it unchanged. They do not need to last. You notice how taste shifts. Simple food feels richer when eaten warm and slowly. Texture matters more than seasoning. Softness, thickness, heat. These qualities satisfy more than variety ever did. Your expectations recalibrate quietly. There is comfort in predictability as well. Knowing how long the fire will hold. Knowing when the room will cool. Knowing what needs to be done next. Uncertainty drains energy. Familiar patterns restore it. As evening deepens, the dugout becomes gentler. Movements slow, voices soften, light dims. The day releases its grip without protest. This transition itself feels soothing. You do not fight it, you let the rhythm carry you. You lie down earlier than you would in another life. Darkness encourages rest. Cold rewards stillness. You arrange blankets, carefully sealing warmth in. The bed accepts you layers, compressing into something supportive. One of the quietest comforts comes from knowing what will not happen tonight. No sudden travel. No unexpected visitors. No new decisions. Winter narrows possibility until it becomes manageable. You feel the earth holding steady above you. That weight feels reassuring rather than oppressive. It presses out drafts, it muffles noise, reminds you that you are not exposed. Your thoughts slow as your body warms under blankets. Worries lose detail, plans blur, the mind follows the body into rest. Comfort here does not announce itself. It arrives as the absence of urgency, as the knowledge that for this moment nothing is wrong. You let that knowledge settle and drift towards sleep, grateful not for luxury but for steadiness. Animals change their relationship to you in winter. Distance shrinks not because trust grows, but because warmth becomes a shared priority. You notice it first in subtle ways. Tracks closer to the door, sounds at night that linger rather than pass through. Life draws inward when the cold deepens. If you keep animals, they become part of the dugout's extended body. Their needs shape your routines. Feed is measured carefully. Water is checked more often. You plan around them without thinking of it as planning. They are simply folded into the rhythm of survival. Sometimes animals come closer than expected. A chicken tucked into a sheltered corner. A dog curled near the stove, careful not to touch metal. Their breathing adds warmth to the room. Their presence adds sound, soft movements, occasional sighs. These noises feel grounding rather than disruptive. You learn to share space without ceremony. Animals do not ask permission. They sense where heat pools and settle there. You adjust without resentment. Warmth is more important than order. Cleanliness bends in winter not from neglect but from prioritization. Even animals outside respond to the dugout differently now. You hear them pause near the structure, small creatures drawn by scent and residual heat. You stay alert, sealing food-checking corners. This vigilance becomes routine, not stressful. It is simply part of winter awareness. There is a quiet exchange happening here. You provide shelter and scraps. Animals provide warmth and companionship. Neither side frames it as generosity. It is mutual adaptation. You notice how animals handle the cold without complaint. They conserve movement. They rest deeply. They wake ready to move when conditions allow. Watching them teaches you something about efficiency. Effort is saved for when it matters. At night, their presence changes the feel of the dugout. The space feels more alive, more layered. Breath overlaps. Heat distributes differently. You wake aware of shifting weight nearby and fall back asleep without concern. Some nights an animal startles awake and listens intently. You pause too, sharing alertness. Then whatever caused it passes and both of you relax again. This shared vigilance feels reassuring. You are not the only one paying attention. You notice that animals accept the dugout fully. They do not question the low ceiling or the dim light. Shelter is shelter. Warmth is warmth. Their simplicity steadies you when thoughts become too tangled. As days pass, you become accustomed to this closeness. What once felt unusual becomes normal. The dugout holds all of you together, adjusting to each body within it. When morning comes, animals stir first, they stretch, they reposition, and their readiness nudges you awake. Another day begins not with an alarm but with shared movement. Outside winter remains indifferent. Inside life clusters and adapts, finding ways to persist together. You settle back into routine, accepting this expanded version of community. Warmth is shared. Space is negotiated. Survival becomes collective. As evening returns, animals settle again near heat. You follow suit. The dugout breathes with multiple bodies now, each contributing a small amount of warmth, a small amount of life. You lie down later, listening to steady breathing, not all your own, and feel comfort deepen. Winter is still present. Hardness remains, but you are not facing it alone. This quiet companionship does not erase difficulty. It softens its edges, and in winter that softness matters. Time stretches oddly in winter, as if it forgets how to move forward, and instead begins to pull. Days feel longer, yet they slip past without leaving clear edges. You wake, tend the fire, eat, work, a little rest, and somehow the light has already begun to fade again. It is not boredom that causes this blur. It is sameness layered carefully day after day. You stop marking time by dates. They lose relevance once the ground hardens and travel becomes uncertain. Instead, you notice patterns. How often the stove needs feeding, how quickly water cools, how many breaths it takes before your fingers warm again near the fire. These rhythms become your calendar. Morning does not feel like a beginning anymore. It feels like a continuation. Night folds into day without a clear seam. Even sleep feels different. You wake several times, not fully, then drift back down. Time loosens its grip. Hours pass unnoticed. You try once to count the days until spring and give up. The number feels abstract, unhelpful. Winter is not a countdown. It is a condition. You live inside it until it releases you. Thinking too far ahead only sharpens impatience. Instead, you focus on immediate sequences. After this task, warmth. After warmth, rest. After rest, another small task. This narrowing of attention brings calm. The future shrinks to something manageable. You notice how memory adjusts as well. Yesterday and last week feel similar. Events blend. Only disruptions stand out. A storm stronger than expected. A visitor arriving unexpectedly. Everything else settles into a shared texture of winter days. At first, this unsettles you. You worry about losing track, about days slipping away unnoticed. Later, you accept it. Precision matters less here. Survival does not require exact recall, it requires presence. The dugout reinforces this softness. Without windows, light does not mark hours clearly. Without travel, distance does not break monotony. Without variety, days merge. The space encourages you to exist in a longer moment rather than a sequence of short ones. You become patient without realizing it. Waiting no longer feels empty. It feels normal. Waiting for water to warm. Waiting for daylight to strengthen. Waiting for weather to ease. These pauses fill themselves. When you sit still listening to the stove, you sometimes lose sense of how long you have been there. 10 minutes, an hour, it hardly matters. Nothing demands immediate action. The absence of urgency becomes a gift. You think about how different this feels from lives measured in schedules and deadlines. Here, time is elastic. It expands around need and contracts around effort. You follow it rather than manage it. As evening arrives, you recognize it not by clock or sun, but by fatigue. Your body tells you when enough has been done. You trust it. Trust grows when patterns repeat reliably. You lie down earlier than you would elsewhere, not because you are tired in the usual sense, but because the day has completed itself. There is nothing more to extract from it. Sleep arrives as continuation rather than conclusion. In dreams, time behaves strangely too. Moments repeat. Scenes linger. Waking feels like re-entering the same long day rather than starting a new one. This stretching of time changes your thinking. You stop rushing thoughts. You let them drift. You notice sensations more deeply. The scrape of straw, the hum of fire, the weight of blankets. These details fill space that urgency once occupied. When you wake again, it feels familiar rather than fresh. You are not disoriented. You are resumed. Winter teaches you that time does not always need to be managed. Sometimes it needs to be inhabited. The dugout makes this lesson unavoidable. There is nowhere else to go. As another day unfolds without clear edges, you move through it calmly, carried by routine rather than pushed by hours. Time holds you the way the earth does, firmly, but without insistence. And in that holding, you rest more deeply than you expected to, even while awake. Belief becomes quieter in winter. It does not disappear, but it changes. Tone lowering its voice to match the season. Big questions feel out of place here. What matters instead are small assurances that help you settle into the night without tension in your chest. You notice this first in habit rather than thought. A phrase repeated before sleep. A gesture performed the same way each evening. A pause taken before stepping outside into the dark. These acts are not dramatic, they do not ask for attention. They simply create a sense of steadiness in a world that rarely offers guarantees. Some evenings you find yourself talking softly to the space itself, not expecting answers, just marking presence. The dugout feels like something you share time with rather than something you occupy. It listens without judgment, say it. It holds warmth when it can. It creaks and settles when it must. You think about how belief here is less about explanation and more about reassurance. You're not trying to understand winter. You are trying to endure it without letting fear sharpen. Comfort comes from repetition rather than revelation. People carry different versions of this inward practice. Some hum quietly while working. Others sit silently, hands folded, eyes half closed, letting the fire's movement occupy their attention. No one instructs these behaviors. They arise naturally when uncertainty lasts long enough. You realize that hope looks different now. It is no longer focused on distant outcomes. It does not strain towards spring in a dramatic way. Instead, it attaches itself to smaller markers, a steady fire, a calm night, a morning without wind. These moments accumulate into something livable. At times doubt slips in anyway. Nights are long, sounds feel unfamiliar, thoughts wander. You let them. Fighting uncertainty only feeds it. Allowing it to pass feels safer. You notice how children respond to this atmosphere. They mirror calm more easily than explanation. When the adults around them settle into routine, children do too. They do not ask why winter behaves the way it does. They accept that it does. Belief becomes communal without being discussed. Everyone follows the same patterns. Everyone trusts the same signals. The dugout becomes a shared centre of gravity, anchoring thought as much as body. You sit near the stove and watch flames move behind iron. Fire has always carried meaning for people, but here it is stripped of symbolism. It is warmth. It is light. It is survival. And yet watching it still steadies you in ways you cannot fully explain. There are moments when you feel gratitude without directing it anywhere. You are grateful that the roof holds, that breath comes easily, that the night remains quiet. This gratitude does not require a recipient, it simply exists. As the season deepens, belief settles into your muscles rather than your mind. You trust that you will wake. You trust that you will tend the fire. You trust that you will adjust again tomorrow. This trust is built from repetition, not certainty. You lie down and feel the weight of blankets press you gently into the bed. The earth above feels solid. The space feels contained. Whatever you believe in or do not matters less than this moment of rest. Outside, winter continues without concern for meaning. Inside, you create enough meaning to sleep. And that you realize as your breathing slows is belief in its quietest and most useful form. Something always breaks in winter. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in small, inconvenient ways that test patience more than strength. A hinge stiffens, a handle loosens, a board shifts just enough to let cold creep through. You notice these things early because ignoring them never works. The ground resists you now. What once yielded to tools has locked itself tight. Digging is slow, sometimes impossible. Repairs that would be simple in warmer months require planning, timing, and compromise. You wait for the brief hours when the sun softens the surface just enough to work, then move quickly before it hardens again. Inside the dugout, you prepare as much as possible. Tools are checked, materials gathered. You decide what can be patched temporarily and what must wait. Winter teaches you to accept provisional solutions. Perfection is postponed, function takes priority. You brace a loose beam with whatever fits. A piece of scrap wood, a wedge cut carefully to size, is not elegant, but it holds. That is enough. You test it with pressure, then leave it alone, trusting that constant attention will do more harm than good. Your hands ache as you work. Cold makes fingers clumsy. Metal steals heat fast. You pause often, warming joints near the stove, then returning to the task. Progress is measured in inches rather than completion. You notice how repair work sharpens focus. There is no room for distraction when conditions are unforgiving. Every movement counts. Mistakes cost more to fix than they do to avoid. You slow down, aligning effort with necessity. Sometimes repairs happen at night. A sudden draft wakes you. A sound changes. You get up quietly and investigate, lantern held low. You adjust a cloth, shift a board, press snow back into place from inside the doorframe. These fixes are small, but they restore balance enough to sleep again. Winter encourages creativity born of limitation. You repurpose objects without hesitation. A broken tool finds new use. A worn blanket becomes insulation. Nothing is wasted because everything might be needed again. You wonder how much of this problem solving will stay with you after winter loosens its grip. Living this way rewires attention. You see possibilities where you once saw inconvenience. You act sooner, not because you're anxious, but because you understand consequences more clearly now. As evening settles in, you inspect the space one last time. Wall steady, roof quiet, fire behaving. The dugout feels secure again, at least for now. That sense of readiness allows you to rest. You lie down knowing that something else will need attention soon. That is not discouraging. It is simply the rhythm of this place. Winter does not allow neglect, but it does reward care. Each small repair buys time. Each adjustment restores comfort just enough. Wrapped in blankets, tools set aside, you drift towards sleep with the quiet satisfaction that comes from meeting the season on its own terms. Spring becomes a place you visit in your thoughts long before it exists outside. You do not speak of it often. Saying the word feels risky, as if naming it too clearly might make winter tighten its grip out of spite. Instead, you imagine details quietly. The sound of water moving again. The smell of damp soil that is not trapped underground. The way light behaves when it no longer skims low and pale. These thoughts arrive without invitation, usually while you are busy with something ordinary. Stirring a pot, folding a blanket, watching steam lift from a cup. Your mind drifts forward and then returns like a hand testing water before pulling back. You allow the drift, but you do not linger. You have learned that winter does not respond well to impatience. Waiting with clenched teeth makes the days heavier. Waiting with loose expectations lets time pass more easily. So you think of spring gently without demanding it. Small signs tempt you anyway. A day when the cold eases slightly. Snow that softens instead of squeaks underfoot. Drips forming at the edge of the doorframe during the warmest hour. You notice these things and store them quietly, not as promises, but as hints. You also remember how deceptive these moments can be. A thaw followed by deeper cold. Meltwater that freezes harder than before. Winter likes to test optimism. You temper your hope accordingly. Inside, the dugout routines remain unchanged. Fire tended, water warmed, work done when light allows. You do not begin dismantling anything. You do not pack away layers. It is too early for that kind of faith. Still, imagination works on you. You picture stepping outside without bracing first. You picture opening the door and leaving it open. You picture earth walls drying fully for the first time in months. These images feel vivid, almost physical. You notice how children speak of spring differently, less cautiously, more directly. They ask when snow will go away, when grass will return. You answer. Without dates, without certainty. Winter has taught you not to promise what you cannot deliver. At night, these thoughts surface again as you lie awake briefly between dreams. You imagine the dugout door swinging wide, light filling the room fully, air moving freely without stealing warmth. The idea feels spacious. Then you let it go, because winter is still here. The fire still needs feeding. The floor is still cold. Tomorrow still demands attention. Living too far ahead risks neglecting what keeps you alive now. You realize something important in this balance. Hope that works is quiet. It does not distract. It coexists with routine rather than replacing it. You wake the next morning and feel the same chill, the same dimness. Nothing has changed outwardly, and yet the thought of spring lingers lightly, not as pressure but as possibility. You carry that possibility with you through the day, letting it warm nothing but your patience. Leaving the dugout does not begin with a single decision. It starts as a loosening, a feeling that the walls no longer need to hold quite so tightly. You notice it in your body first. Shoulders lift more easily, breath deepens without effort. You stand a little straighter without thinking about the ceiling. The outside world begins to call softly, not loudly enough to demand action, just enough to be noticed. Sounds change. Wind carries less bite. Light lasts longer before fading. You step out and do not rush back in immediately. That pause feels significant. Inside, the dugout looks smaller now. Not inadequate, just finished. It has done its job. The walls are marked by use. The floor remembers footsteps. Everything inside carries the imprint of time spent close together. You see these marks clearly now, perhaps because you no longer need them as urgently. You begin to move things without fully committing to change. A blanket folded and set aside rather than spread again. A tool cleaned more thoroughly than usual. These actions are not departures. They are acknowledgements. You think about how much this space has shaped you. Movement slowed, attention sharpened, patience deepened. The dugout did not teach comfort. It taught steadiness. That lesson feels portable. There is a moment when you stand at the door and look back inside. Light spills farther in now. Shadows retreat more easily. The air feels less heavy. You realize the dugout is already returning to the earth even while you still occupy it. Moisture dries, scents fade. The space begins to release its hold. You feel a quiet gratitude, not dramatic or sentimental, just a recognition that this place kept you alive. That is enough. When you step outside again, you do not feel relief so much as expansion. The world feels larger, but you do not feel smaller within it. The dugout has taught you how to exist in limited space without shrinking. That skill stays with you. You carry pieces of this life forward, the way you listen before acting, the way you conserve energy, the way you value warmth and rest without excess. These habits do not fall away just because winter does. You glance back one last time. The door stands open. The dugout waits without expectation. It will hold warmth a little longer, then it will cool, then it will become part of the land again. You turn and walk away slowly, not because you are reluctant, but because there is no need to rush. Leaving does not erase what happened here, it completes it. What the earth taught you does not arrive as a lesson with clear edges. It settles gradually the way cold once did until you realize it has become part of how you move through the world. You notice it in small decisions, how you pause before acting, how you listen before assuming, how you trust routine more than impulse. The dugout no longer surrounds you, but its logic stays close. You still notice where warmth gathers in a room. You still arrange objects with an eye toward efficiency. You still feel a faint gratitude when shelter holds steady through discomfort. These instincts do not fade quickly. They have been practiced too thoroughly. You think back to the months spent underground not as a single stretch but as layers. Cold layered over effort, effort layered over patience, patience layered over quiet endurance. None of it was dramatic. That is what made it effective. The earth taught you humility without asking for it. You learned that comfort is conditional, that control is limited, that survival depends less on force than on attention. These understandings did not arrive all at once. They accumulated day by day until they felt obvious. You remember how stillness became productive, how waiting became a skill, how listening mattered as much as doing. These are not lessons that shout. They whisper, and only if you are quiet enough to hear them. You carry forward an appreciation for small margins, a little warmth, a little light, enough food, enough rest. You no longer measure success by excess. You measure it by continuity. The dugout asked you to be present. There was no room for distraction, no space for fantasy. Everything you needed was as close and everything you ignored mattered. Living this way sharpened awareness without cruelty. As you move on, you realize that this is what stays. Not the cold, not the dampness, not the confinement. What stays is the ability to live inside limits without resentment. You breathe more slowly now, even remembering it. The memory itself has weight grounding you. Now the pace softens, the images grow gentler. You no longer need to hold anything in place. The earth that once pressed close releases you into open space, and you carry its steadiness with you like a low, constant warmth. Imagine the dugout settling back into the land behind you. Grass will grow over it again. Snow will pass over it without knowing what it once held. The space will rest just as you are resting now. Your breathing slows. Each inhale feels easy. Each exhale lets go of what you no longer need to hold. The lessons remain without effort. There is nothing left to prepare for tonight. No fire to tend, no walls to watch. You are safe here now. Let the quiet stretch. Let the images fade. Let the sense of shelter linger without needing a shape. Sleep arrives the same way winter nights once did, gently without urgency. You have done enough. Sweet dreams.